I need you pregnant within 6 months, or your father dies screaming. The words hung in the tobacco-scented air, like a death sentence. Aria Bennett's wrists burned against the zip ties as the warehouse lights flickered overhead, casting shadows across the face of the man who'd just bought her future. Lucien Moretti, 57, silver-haired, and carved from violence, didn't blink as he made his offer. 1 year, 1 child, 1 impossible choice. But here's the thing about cages. Sometimes the lock is on the inside. This is the story of how a 26-year-old art curator became the wife of Chicago's most feared king, and how a contract written in blood became something neither of them could walk away from. If you want to see how far this story travels, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city below. Now let's go back to the beginning, to the night everything changed. The first mistake Aria Bennett made that night was answering her door at 3 a.m. The second was thinking she had a choice. She'd been dreaming, one of those weightless, formless dreams that evaporate the moment consciousness creeps back in, when the pounding started. Not a knock. A demand. The kind of sound that said, "We're coming in whether you open this or not." Aria's apartment in Lincoln Park wasn't much. A 4th-floor walk-up with temperamental heating and a landlord who treated maintenance requests like optional suggestions. But it was hers. She'd scraped together the deposit working double shifts at the gallery, had painted the bedroom walls herself in a shade called museum linen that cost $43 a gallon. She'd built something here, something safe. The pounding came again, harder this time. She stumbled out of bed, her oversized university sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder, her dark hair a wild tangle around her face. Through the peephole, she saw 2 men in dark suits. Not police. Worse. "Aria Bennett." The taller one's voice was flat, professional. "Open the door. We're not here to hurt you." Yet her brain supplied helpfully. "I'm calling the police," she said, hating how her voice cracked on the last word. "Your father's debt was called in 3 hours ago. We're here on behalf of Mr. Moretti. You can come with us now, or we can come back with more convincing methods. Your choice." Her father. Of course it was her father. Aria's hand fell away from the deadbolt. Thomas Bennett, charming, reckless, perpetually optimistic Thomas Bennett, had a gift for 2 things: finding trouble and leaving his daughter to clean up the mess. She'd bailed him out before. Covered his rent when he gambled away his disability check. Paid off loan sharks who came sniffing around his studio apartment in Rogers Park. But this sounded different. "I don't have any money," she said through the door. "We're not here for money, Miss Bennett. We're here for you." The taller man produced a phone, tapped something on the screen, then held it up to the peephole. The video quality was grainy but clear enough. Her father tied to a chair in what looked like a basement, blood crusted around his nose, one eye swollen shut. A timestamp in the corner read 2:47, 16 minutes ago. "He's alive, Len," the man said. "How long he stays that way depends on how cooperative you are in the next 30 seconds. Aria's hands shook as she unlocked the deadbolt, the chain, the handle lock she'd installed herself after a break-in 2 floors down last spring. The door swung open, and the 2 men stepped inside like they owned the place. Maybe they did now. "Get dressed," the shorter one said. He had a scar that ran from his left ear to his collar, and eyes that had stopped registering human suffering somewhere around his first felony. "Something nice. You're meeting the boss. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what this is about." The taller one, she mentally labeled him almost polite, gestured toward her bedroom. "Your father borrowed $2.1 million from Mr. Moretti's organization over the last 18 months. He was supposed to flip a warehouse property in Pilsen, turn it into loft conversions, make everyone rich. Instead, he gambled away the construction loan, forged inspection documents, and disappeared for 3 weeks. The property's been condemned. Mr. Moretti is displeased. $2.1 million. The number didn't feel real. It was too big, too abstract, like hearing about casualties in a distant war. Her father had never handled anything larger than a 5-figure poker debt. How had he can't pay that back, Aria whispered. "No," Almost Polite agreed. "He can't. But Mr. Moretti is a reasonable man. He's offering an alternative arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" The scarred one smiled for the first time. It didn't reach his eyes. "The kind you discuss in person. Now get dressed, Miss Bennett. We're on a schedule." They drove in silence through Chicago's sleeping streets, the city a blur of sodium lights and empty intersections. Aria sat in the back of a black Mercedes SUV, her hands clasped in her lap to hide their trembling. She'd thrown on the only thing in her closet that qualified as nice, a charcoal shift dress she'd worn to gallery openings, paired with ankle boots that had seen better days. No jewelry except the thin gold necklace her mother had left her, something to hold on to. Almost Polite drove. The scarred one sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and vaguely threatening. Neither of them spoke. Outside, Chicago transformed from residential neighborhoods to industrial zones. The buildings growing more skeletal, more hostile. They pulled into a warehouse district near the river, the kind of place where gentrification hadn't bothered to knock yet. Graffiti-tagged walls, broken streetlights, loading docks that probably moved more than furniture after dark. The SUV stopped in front of a corrugated metal building with no identifying marks. Just a number spray-painted on the door, 47. "Out," Scarface said. Aria's legs felt like water as she stepped onto the cracked pavement. The March wind cut through her dress, and she wrapped her arms around herself. Almost Polite led her to a side entrance, produced a keycard, and the door clicked open. Inside was nothing like she expected. The warehouse had been converted into something between a fortress and a gentleman's club. Exposed brick walls, reclaimed wood floors, industrial lighting fixtures that probably cost more than her annual salary, leather furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, a bar that looked like it had been salvaged from a Prohibition-era speakeasy. And everywhere, the sense of watching eyes, even though the vast space appeared empty. "Wait here," Almost Polite said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs. Aria didn't sit. She stood in the middle of the room, her heart hammering, her mind racing through scenarios. Ransom? Coercion? They'd said alternative arrangement, which could mean anything from indentured servitude to... The elevator at the far end of the space dinged. Aria turned and met the man who would ruin her life. Lucien Moretti didn't look like a monster. That was the first thing that struck her. She'd built an image in her mind during the drive. Someone brutish, scarred, visibly cruel. Instead, the man who stepped out of the elevator wore a three-piece charcoal suit tailored so precisely it might as well have been armor. His hair was silver, swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and cold intelligence. 57, she remembered, Almost Polite saying, but he moved like someone decades younger, each step deliberate and controlled. His eyes, though. Those were where the danger lived, gray as lake ice in February and just as unforgiving. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was smoke and old whiskey, with an accent that suggested Italian roots buried under decades of American reinvention. "Thank you for joining us." As if I had a choice, she thought, but didn't say. "Where's my father?" Lucien crossed to the bar, poured 2 fingers of something amber into a crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. "Your father is alive and, considering his recent behavior, in better condition than he deserves. Would you like to see him?" "I want to know what you want from me." He smiled. It was the kind of smile that probably made most people tell him everything he wanted to hear. "Direct. I appreciate that. Most people waste my time with pleading or threats. You've done neither." "I'm sure you'll give me a reason to plead soon enough." His smile widened. "Perhaps. Come. Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Aria followed him toward the elevator, her boots clicking against the wood floor. Up close, she could see the details the distance had hidden, the thin scar along his jaw, the way his left hand bore faint burns along the knuckles, the silver cufflinks engraved with a family crest she didn't recognize. The elevator opened directly into what could only be described as an office built for intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river, the city's skyline a glittering sprawl beyond. The desk was mahogany, probably antique, probably worth more than everything Aria owned combined. Behind it hung a painting, Caravaggio. Her art history degree supplied automatically The Taking of Christ, a brutal depiction of betrayal rendered in shadow and light. "Do you know what I do, Miss Bennett?" Lucien settled into the leather chair behind his desk, gesturing for her to sit opposite. She remained standing. "You hurt people who owe you money. I maintain order in a chaotic world. Your father signed contracts, made promises, took money that wasn't his to lose. In the legitimate business world, he'd file bankruptcy, restructure, leave his creditors holding worthless paper. In my world, debts are settled in full, always. I don't have $2, 1 million. No one does, if they're honest. That's the problem with modern debt. It's become abstract. Numbers on a screen. I prefer tangible solutions. He opened a drawer, withdrew a folder, slid it across the desk toward her. Which brings us to my proposal. Aria didn't touch the folder. I'm not sleeping with you for money. Of course not. You'll be sleeping with me because you're my wife. The words landed like a physical blow. Aria actually stumbled back a step, her mind refusing to process what she'd just heard. Excuse me? Lucien leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I need an heir. You need your father to live. These are compatible problems with a single elegant solution. Marry me, provide me with a child, remain in the marriage for 1 year, and your father's debt is forgiven. He walks away. You walk away. Everyone lives. You're insane. I'm practical. I've outlived 2 wives, Miss Bennett. The first died in childbirth with our daughter, who followed her 6 days later. The second was killed in a car accident 3 years into our marriage. No children. I'm 57 years old, and my doctors inform me I have perhaps 4 years remaining, if I'm fortunate. Aggressive carcinoma. It's in remission currently, but these things rarely stay buried. He said it so matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing stock portfolios rather than his own mortality. I have built an empire over 35 years, he continued. Legitimate businesses, investments, properties worth hundreds of millions. But the foundation, the structure that protects it all, requires continuity, a bloodline. Without an heir, everything I've built will be torn apart by rivals and prosecutors within 6 months of my death. I won't allow that. Then adopt. Find someone who actually wants this. I've considered traditional routes, courtship, romance. The way he said the word made it sound like a communicable disease. But I don't have time for pretense, and I have no interest in a partner who mistakes my wealth for affection. You, however, you're here because you have to be. There's honesty in that, clarity. Aria's laugh came out harsh and brittle. You want to buy a wife. I want to make a business arrangement with a woman intelligent enough to understand the terms. You'll live in comfort, want for nothing materially, and after 1 year you'll receive a settlement of $10 million. Your father's debt is erased. You're free. Except for the child you're demanding. Requesting. The child will be raised with every advantage, private schools, trust funds, protection. You can remain as involved as you wish in their life, or you can walk away entirely. That choice is yours. He made it sound so reasonable, so clinical, like they were negotiating a corporate merger instead of a human life. Aria's hands clenched at her sides. And if I refuse? Lucien's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something that reminded her exactly who she was talking to. Then your father dies slowly and publicly, as an example to others who might consider defrauding my organization. His body will be found in pieces across 3 counties. And you, he paused, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if there was something you could have done, if you could have saved him. The threat was delivered in the same calm tone he'd used to discuss his cancer diagnosis. You're a monster, Aria whispered. Yes, Lucien agreed. But I'm a monster offering you a choice. Most people in your position don't get that luxury. The folder sat on the desk between them like a loaded gun. Aria stared at it for a long moment, then reached out with shaking hands and flipped it open. Inside was a contract, because of course there was a contract, along with medical records, financial statements, and photographs. The first photo made her breath catch. Her father, cleaned up since the video, sitting in what looked like a hospital room, alive. Bandaged, but alive. He's being cared for, Lucien said quietly. I don't damage assets unnecessarily. Assets. As if her father were a piece of equipment. Aria forced herself to read the contract. It was surprisingly straightforward for something so insane. Duration? 12 months from date of marriage. Primary obligation? Conception and delivery of 1 healthy child, DNA. Testing to confirm paternity. residence, shared quarters, and Mr. Moretti's principal residence, Chicago, or other properties as needed. Conduct. Both parties agree to maintain the public appearance of a legitimate marriage. Discretion regarding the contractual nature of the arrangement is required. Termination. Upon successful delivery and completion of the 12-month term, Miss Bennett will receive a one-time payment of $10 million, full custody negotiation rights, and complete release from all obligations related to Thomas Bennett's debt. Consequences of breach. Failure to fulfill contractual obligations will result in immediate forfeiture of all benefits and reinstatement of the original debt, plus penalties. There were another 16 pages of legal language, contingencies, and clauses covering everything from infidelity, prohibited, to media exposure, forbidden, to what happened if she miscarried, medical evaluation, 3-month extension to try again. It was the most romantic thing Aria had ever read. "You've actually done this before," she said numbly. "I've learned to protect my interests. The contract is fair, Miss Bennett. Harsh, but fair. Fair would be letting my father face his own consequences. Perhaps. But you're here, which suggests you disagree with that assessment." Lucien stood, moved to the windows overlooking the city. With his back to her, he looked almost human. Almost. "I won't pretend this is anything other than what it is, a transaction, but I will make you 2 promises. First, I won't force myself on you. Conception will happen on your terms, your timeline, within the 6-month window specified. And second, I will keep you safe. From the moment you sign that contract until the moment you walk away, you will have my complete protection. In my world, Miss Bennett, that's worth more than love." Aria wanted to throw the contract in his face, wanted to tell him to go to hell, that she'd find another way, that her father's mistakes weren't her responsibility. But the words wouldn't come. Because buried under the rage and fear was a terrible pragmatic truth. She had no other way. Her father would die if she walked out of here. And maybe Lucien Moretti was a monster, but he was a monster offering her a lifeboat in the middle of a shipwreck. "I need time," she said. "You have 30 seconds. After that, my men take your father to a location I guarantee you'll never find, and we proceed with a more traditional collection process." "That's not time. That's a gun to my head." "Yes," Lucien agreed, turning back to face her. "It is. But I'm tired, Miss Bennett. I'm dying. I'm running out of patience, and I've had a very long day. So you have 30 seconds to decide. Do you sign, or do you walk away?" Aria looked down at the contract, at the photographs of her father, at the coldly elegant signature line waiting for her name. She thought about her mother, who died when Aria was 12, leaving her with a father who loved her but couldn't stop destroying himself. She thought about the life she'd built, small, safe, hers. She thought about what it would mean to give it all up, to become this man's wife in name and obligation if not affection. And she thought about living with the knowledge that she'd let her father die because she was too afraid to make a deal with the devil. "I want to see him first," she said, "before I sign. I want to see my father and know he's really alive." Lucien studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Carlos." Almost Polite appeared so quickly, he must have been waiting just outside the door. "Sir?" "Take Miss Bennett to the medical suite. 5 minutes." Her father looked like he'd aged a decade in the weeks since she'd last seen him. Thomas Bennett sat on the edge of a hospital bed in what was clearly a professional medical facility, not some basement torture chamber. The room had monitors, IV stands, even a crash cart in the corner. A woman in scrubs was checking his blood pressure, her movements efficient and detached. "Aria?" Her father's voice cracked when he saw her. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I never meant—" "How could you?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "How could you be so reckless? $2.1 million, Dad. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking I could finally give you something." He tried to stand, but the nurse pressed him back down with a firm hand. "That property was supposed to be our future. I was going to turn it around, make real money for once, and you could quit that gallery job and focus on your painting like you always wanted. I don't paint anymore. And I like my job. And I got in over my head, and by the time I realized the inspection reports were faked, it was too late. Moretti's people came for me, and I thought—" He swallowed hard. "I thought I was dead. But then they said you were coming, and I thought maybe there was a way out, but Jesus, Aria, you shouldn't be here. You should run. Get as far from this as possible. It's too late for that. Her father's eyes, the same dark brown as hers, filled with tears. Whatever he's asking you to do, say no. I'm not worth it. I've never been worth it. And there it was. The truth they'd both been dancing around for 14 years, since her mother's funeral, since the first time he'd gambled away the rent money, and Aria had covered for him at 16. He wasn't worth it. But he was all she had. I love you, Dad, Aria said quietly. Even when I hate you for putting me in this position, I love you. So I'm going to do something incredibly stupid, and you're going to live with it. Aria, no. But she was already turning, already walking back to where almost polite Carlos waited by the door. Take me back to Mr. Moretti. I'm ready to sign. Ito. The pen felt too heavy in her hand. Lucien had produced it from somewhere. An actual fountain pen, sleek black lacquer with gold trim. The kind of thing that probably cost more than her monthly rent. I need to add a condition, Aria said. Lucien raised an eyebrow. This isn't a negotiation. Then consider it a clarification. The contract says you won't force yourself on me. I want that explicit. No sex without my consent. Not in 6 months. Not ever. If I can't get pregnant naturally on terms we both agree to, we explore medical alternatives. But my body is mine until I decide otherwise. Something flickered in Lucien's expression. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. You're establishing boundaries with a man who could have you killed for inconvenience. You're a businessman. You said so yourself. This is a business arrangement, which means both parties have rights. I'm stating mine clearly so there's no confusion later. For a long moment, Lucien said nothing. Then he took the contract, produced his own pen, and added a handwritten clause at the bottom of page 3. Conception will occur through mutually consensual relations, or if unsuccessful within the 6-month window, through medical intervention, IVF, etc., to be determined by mutual agreement. At no time will physical coercion be employed. He initialed it, slid the contract back to her. Anything else, Miss Bennett? Aria scanned the pages one more time, looking for loopholes, traps, anything that might give her leverage later. But Lucien Moretti hadn't built an empire by leaving exploitable gaps in his contracts. This was airtight. She signed her name. The pen made a soft, scratching sound against the paper, and with each letter, Aria felt her old life falling away. The gallery, her apartment, the quiet routine she'd built, all of it gone, traded for a year in hell with a man who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. Lucien countersigned below her name, dated it. Then he pressed a button on his desk, and a woman appeared, lawyer, Aria assumed, based on the briefcase and the expression that suggested she'd seen too many contracts just like this one. Witness, Lucien said simply. The woman signed, stamped the document with a notary seal, and just like that, Aria Bennett became someone's contractual wife. We'll marry in 2 weeks, Lucien said, tucking the contract into a safe behind the Caravaggio. City Hall, minimal witnesses. I'll have my people prepare the necessary documentation. In the meantime, you'll move into my residence in Gold Coast. A room has been prepared for you. I have a job, a lease. Your lease will be terminated, compensated at 3 times the buyout fee. As for your job, he tilted his head, considering. Do you enjoy it? The question caught her off guard. Yes, I love it. Then keep it. I have no interest in making you miserable, Miss Bennett. Bored, perhaps. Frustrated, certainly, but not miserable. You'll need something to occupy your time during the day, and I find that women with purpose are significantly less troublesome than those with too much idle time. How modern of you. I'm adaptable. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. Carlos will take you to your apartment. Pack what you need for tonight. Tomorrow, a team will handle the rest. You'll be moved into your new quarters by evening. Just like that. Just like that. Lucien moved toward her, and Aria forced herself not to step back. He was taller than she'd realized, at least 6'2", and up close she could see the faint lines around his eyes. The evidence of someone who'd lived a lot of life, most of it hard. You made a choice tonight, Miss Bennett, a pragmatic choice that saved your father's life and bought you a future. I respect that. What happens next depends entirely on how you handle the hand you've been dealt. He extended his hand. Aria stared at it for a moment, then shook it. His grip was firm, warm, utterly controlled. "Welcome to the family," Lucien said. And despite everything, despite the contract and the coercion and the absolute insanity of what she'd just agreed to, Aria heard something in his voice that almost sounded like sincerity. The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur. Carlos didn't try to make conversation, which Aria appreciated. She sat in the back seat, her mind careening between panic and an eerie sense of calm. She'd just signed away a year of her life, agreed to have a child with a stranger, become collateral in a deal her father had made with the devil. And yet, there was something almost liberating about it. She'd spent her entire adult life making careful, measured decisions, safe choices. Build a career, pay the bills, don't take unnecessary risks. And where had it gotten her? A fourth-floor walk-up and a father who kept finding new ways to need saving. At least this way, she'd taken control of something, made a choice, even if all the options were terrible. Carlos walked her to her door, waited while she unlocked it, then stationed himself in the hallway. "Pack light tonight," he said. "The rest can wait until tomorrow." Inside, her apartment looked exactly as she'd left it, frozen in the moment before her life imploded. Coffee mug in the sink, book splayed open on the arm of the couch, the heating system ticking its familiar metallic rhythm. Aria moved through the space like a ghost, pulling a duffel bag from her closet and filling it with necessities. Toiletries, a few changes of clothes, the photograph of her mother she kept on her nightstand. The gold necklace was already around her neck. She paused at her closet, staring at the collection of dresses and blazers she'd accumulated for gallery events. Would she need those anymore? Would anything from her old life translate to whatever came next? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your new number, effective immediately. All other phones will be deactivated tomorrow. Memorize this. LM." Of course he'd already changed her number. Of course he'd thought of everything. Aria saved the contact as husband with a bitter laugh, then finished packing. 20 minutes later, she was back in the Mercedes, watching her neighborhood disappear through the tinted windows. "Where are we going?" she asked Carlos. "Home," he said simply. Lucien Moretti's home turned out to be a limestone mansion in Gold Coast that probably had its own zip code. The gate alone looked like it could withstand a military assault. Beyond it, a circular driveway wound through manicured grounds toward a building that seemed to have absorbed every architectural excess of the Gilded Age. Soaring columns, ornate stonework, enough windows to stock a glass factory. "Jesus," Aria muttered. "Mr. Moretti prefers to maintain a certain standard," Carlos said, and she caught the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. Inside was somehow even more overwhelming. Marble floors, a chandelier that belonged in Versailles, staircases that curved in opposite directions like something from a movie set, and everywhere that same sense of meticulous control she'd felt in the warehouse. Nothing out of place, nothing left to chance. A woman in her 60s appeared from somewhere, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her expression professionally neutral. "Miss Bennett, I'm Constance Walsh, house manager. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters." Quarters. Not your room, as if Aria were a soldier being assigned barracks. They climbed one of the staircases, moved through hallways lined with art that made Aria's gallery look like a yard sale, and finally stopped at a set of double doors. "Your suite," Constance said, opening them. Suite was an understatement. The space was larger than Aria's entire apartment. A sitting room with a fireplace, a bedroom with a four-poster bed that looked like it had hosted minor royalty, an ensuite bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, walk-in closet, private balcony overlooking the grounds. It was beautiful. It was a cage. "Mr. Moretti's suite is at the end of this hallway," Constance continued, her tone carefully neutral. "You won't be disturbed tonight. Breakfast is served at 7 in the morning room, though you're welcome to request something earlier if needed. Is there anything else?" "Where's my father?" "Being transferred to a private care facility. Mr. Moretti felt it was prudent to ensure he receives proper medical attention for his injuries. You'll be able to visit once he's settled, likely in the next day or two." "Of course. Keep Thomas Bennett comfortable and monitored. Make sure he can't run or talk to the wrong people." "Smart." "Thank you," Aria said, because what else was there to say? Constance left, and Aria was alone. She stood in the middle of the sitting room, her duffel bag still clutched in one hand, and felt the full weight of what she'd done settle over her like a physical thing. 1 year. She could survive 1 year. She'd survived her mother's death, survived raising herself while her father spiraled, survived every small betrayal and disappointment that came from loving someone who couldn't quite love himself. This was just another test, another challenge to get through. Aria dropped the duffel bag, walked to the balcony doors, and stepped outside. The city sprawled below her, lights twinkling in the darkness like false stars. Somewhere out there was her old apartment, her old life, the person she'd been 6 hours ago. That Aria seemed impossibly distant now, like a character from a book she'd read years ago. This Aria, the one standing on a billionaire's balcony, contractually obligated to produce an heir, was someone new, someone she'd have to learn to be. Behind her, she heard the suite door open. She turned, expecting Constance with extra towels or some other domestic concern. It was Lucien. He changed out of the three-piece suit into something more casual. Dark slacks, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing more of those burn scars on his hands. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her car. "I thought you might need this," he said, setting them on the balcony table. "It's been a long night." Aria eyed the wine suspiciously. "Are you trying to get me drunk?" "I'm trying to establish a baseline of civil interaction. We're going to be living in the same house for the next year, Miss Bennett. We can either make that tolerable or miserable. The choice, as always, is yours." He poured 2 glasses, a deep red that caught the light like liquid rubies, and handed her one. Aria took it, sipped. It was predictably the best wine she'd ever tasted. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 strangers bound by contract and desperation, watching the city breathe below them. "Why me?" Aria asked finally. "You could have any woman you wanted. Someone who'd actually want this." "Want is complicated," Lucien said. "Want comes with expectations, emotions, the potential for messiness. You, on the other hand, are here because you made a rational choice under impossible circumstances. There's purity in that, clarity. You keep using that word. Clarity. As if kidnapping someone's daughter and forcing her into marriage is somehow transparent. I didn't force you. I presented options, and you selected the one that served your interests. That's not force. That's negotiation." Aria laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You're insane if you actually believe that." "Perhaps. Or perhaps I've simply lived long enough to understand that everyone has a price. The only difference between us, Miss Bennett, is that I'm honest about mine." He finished his wine in one long swallow, set the glass down. "Sleep. Tomorrow, we begin the actual work of making this arrangement functional. You'll need your strength." Then he was gone, leaving Aria alone with the city and her thoughts. She stood on the balcony for a long time after that, watching the lights, feeling the cool March wind cut through her dress. Somewhere in the house, Lucien Moretti was probably already asleep, his conscience as clear as his contract. And Aria? She went back inside, locked the doors, and finally let herself cry, not for what she'd lost, but for what she was about to become. End of part 1. Morning came too fast and too bright. Aria woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover, her body stiff from sleeping in her clothes on top of the duvet. For one blissful, disoriented moment, she thought she was back in her apartment, that the entire previous night had been some fever dream brought on by bad takeout and exhaustion. Then she saw the room. The memory crashed back in waves. The contract, her father, Lucien Moretti's cold gray eyes, as he'd handed her a glass of wine and called their arrangement clarity. Her phone, the new one, showed 6:47 a.m. 13 minutes until breakfast, which apparently happened whether she wanted it or not. Aria dragged herself to the bathroom, caught sight of her reflection in the mirror, and nearly didn't recognize the woman staring back. Dark circles under her eyes, hair a tangled mess. Still wearing yesterday's dress, now wrinkled beyond redemption. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who'd sold herself and was trying to figure out how to live with it. The shower helped. Hot water, pressure that could strip paint, and enough expensive products lining the shelves to stock a department store. Aria stood under the spray for longer than necessary, letting the heat unknot the tension in her shoulders. trying to scrub away the feeling that she'd woken up in someone else's life. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was somehow both impossibly soft and impossibly heavy, she found that someone had been in her room. Her duffel bag had been unpacked. Her clothes hung in the closet alongside things she definitely hadn't brought. New dresses, blazers, even shoes in her exact size. On the bed lay a simple outfit: black slacks, a cream silk blouse, understated gold jewelry. A note in precise handwriting. For breakfast. You're not a prisoner, but first impressions matter in this house. C.W. Constance Walsh, clearly. The house manager who probably knew more about Lucien Moretti's secrets than anyone who wasn't actively committing crimes for him. Aria dressed in the provided clothes, hating how perfectly they fit, hating even more how good they looked. The woman in the mirror now could have been anyone. Some Gold Coast socialite, a lawyer's wife, a woman who'd chosen this life instead of having it chosen for her. She applied minimal makeup, pulled her hair into a low ponytail, and went to find breakfast. The house was even more labyrinthine in daylight. Aria got lost twice before finally locating what Constance had called the morning room, a sun-drenched space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. A table was set for two, laden with enough food to feed a small army: fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, bacon, what looked like homemade granola. Lucien sat at the head of the table reading a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, because apparently he was committed to every wealthy old man stereotype, and drinking coffee from a delicate porcelain cup. He looked up when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Bennett. I trust you slept well." It wasn't really a question. "I've had better nights," Aria said, sliding into the chair across from him. "And it's Mrs. Moretti now, isn't it? Or will be in 2 weeks. Might as well start practicing." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe. "Technically, you're still Miss Bennett until the ceremony, but I appreciate the commitment to accuracy." He folded the newspaper, set it aside. "Coffee? Please." He poured from a silver carafe with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The coffee was perfect, of course. Rich and dark without being bitter, probably sourced from some single-origin farm in Colombia that tourists had never heard of. Aria took a long sip, felt the caffeine start to work its magic. "So what happens now?" "Now we establish routine. You'll keep your position at the gallery. I've already had my lawyers contact your employer to negotiate a more flexible schedule. You'll need time for appointments, dress fittings, medical consultations, prenuptial counseling if you feel it's necessary, though the contract supersedes anything a counselor might suggest." How thoughtful. "I'm pragmatic, not cruel. You'll also need to be seen with me publicly. Dinners, charity events, the occasional social obligation. My associates need to believe this is a legitimate union, which means we'll need to develop at least a working rapport." Aria stabbed a piece of melon with more force than necessary. "And the rest of it? The actual purpose of this whole arrangement?" "You mean conception?" Lucien said it like he was discussing quarterly earnings. "We have 6 months per the contract. I see no reason to rush. You need time to adjust, and frankly, forcing the issue would be counterproductive. Stress impacts fertility." How romantic. Romance has nothing to do with this. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling gray eyes. But comfort does. Trust, to whatever limited degree we can manage it. "You signed a contract, Miss Bennett, but I'm not interested in a resentful, miserable wife. That serves neither of us." "So what? We're supposed to pretend to like each other until I'm comfortable enough to sleep with you? I'm suggesting we find a way to coexist that doesn't involve daily warfare. Whether that leads to genuine comfort or merely professional tolerance is up to you." Aria set down her fork, met his gaze directly. "Let me be very clear about something, Mr. Moretti. I will fulfill the terms of our contract. I will appear with you publicly. I will live in this house, and when the time comes, I will do what's necessary to produce your heir. But I will never, never pretend that this is anything other than what it is. A transaction. You bought a womb and a year of my life. You don't get my affection as a bonus." For a long moment, Lucien said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Good." "Good? I don't trust people who tell me what they think I want to hear. You're angry, you're honest about it, and you're drawing boundaries. That's infinitely more useful than false compliance." He stood, buttoned his suit jacket. I have meetings until early evening. Carlos will be available if you need anything, and Constance will show you the rest of the house. Your father has been moved to North Shore Recovery. It's a private facility in Winnetka. You can visit this afternoon if you'd like. I would. I'll have Carlos drive you. 2:00. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. There's a study on the second floor north wing. It's yours if you want it. I noticed you didn't pack any art supplies, but I thought you might appreciate the space. The light is good. Then he was gone, leaving Aria alone with her coffee and the distinct sensation that she'd just been outmaneuvered without quite understanding how. The walk to North Shore Recovery took 45 minutes through Chicago's northern suburbs, the landscape gradually shifting from urban density to tree-lined streets and sprawling estates. Aria sat in the back of the Mercedes, watching wealth accumulate in the form of bigger houses and better landscaping, and tried not to think about the fact that she now lived in a world where private recovery facilities were just an accepted part of the infrastructure. Carlos pulled up to a building that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical center. All glass and modern architecture with grounds that could have hosted a wedding. "I'll wait here," Carlos said, which Aria was starting to understand meant I'll stand guard and make sure nothing goes wrong. Inside, a receptionist directed her to the third floor, where her father had been given a private room with a view of the gardens. She found him sitting up in bed, looking significantly better than he had in the warehouse. The swelling around his eye had gone down, and someone had cleaned him up, given him fresh clothes. "Aria," his voice broke on her name. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "Of course I came." She settled into the chair beside his bed, noticed the IV in his arm, the monitors tracking his vitals. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been beaten half to death by professionals." He attempted a smile. It didn't quite land. "But they're taking good care of me, better than I deserve. The doctors say another week and I can go home." "About that." Aria took a breath. "Your apartment's been paid through the end of the year. After that, you're moving to a smaller place in Evanston, 1 bedroom, rent covered. Moretti's people will set it up. You'll also have a monthly allowance, enough to live on if you're careful." Thomas stared at her. "He's doing all this?" "It's in the contract. Terms of my agreement." She couldn't quite bring herself to say marriage yet. "As long as you don't gamble, don't take out any more loans, and basically don't do anything stupid for the next year, you're free." "And if I do?" "Then the deal is void, and we both suffer the consequences. So please, Dad, for once in your life, just don't." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "What did you have to promise him?" Aria looked away, focused on the garden outside the window. "Everything he asked for." "Baby, no, you can't." "It's done. I signed the papers. We're getting married in 2 weeks, and in a year, I walk away with enough money to never have to worry about bailing you out again." She turned back to him, and she knew her expression was hard, knew she probably looked like a stranger. "This is the last time, Dad. The absolute last time I clean up your mess. After this, you're on your own." Thomas Bennett had never been good at accepting responsibility. He'd spent Aria's entire life finding ways to deflect, rationalize, explain away his failures as bad luck or timing or other people's malice. But something in her voice must have finally broken through because he didn't argue. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all of it. For your mother, for every time I let you down. For this. I'm so goddamn sorry, Aria." "I know." And she did. That was the worst part, knowing he was genuinely sorry, that he hated himself for his weakness, but that none of it would change the pattern. "Just get better. Stay clean. That's all I need from you." She stayed for another hour, making small talk about the facility, the food, the physical therapy he'd need for his ribs. Normal conversation, as if they were normal people dealing with normal problems. When she finally left, her father was dozing, and Aria felt the familiar cocktail of love and frustration that had defined their relationship for as long as she could remember. Carlos was exactly where she'd left him, leaning against the Mercedes with the casual alertness of someone who'd been in security for decades. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Define all right." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Fair enough. Where to?" "The gallery. I need to talk to my boss." The Chicago Institute of Contemporary Art occupied a renovated warehouse in the West Loop, all exposed brick and industrial chic. Aria had worked there for 3 years, starting as a docent and working her way up to assistant curator. It wasn't glamorous, the pay was barely livable and the hours were punishing, but she loved it. Loved the art, the artists, the way each exhibition felt like telling a new story. She found Marcus Chen, the director, in his office, surrounded by grant applications, and looking like he'd aged 5 years since she'd seen him last week. "Aria, thank God, I was about to call you." He stood, gesturing her to a chair. "I got the strangest phone call this morning from a law firm claiming to represent your husband? Fiancé. Technically, it's complicated." Marcus's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "You're getting married? Since when?" "Since approximately 18 hours ago. Long story, most of it awful, none of it particularly relevant to my job performance." Aria folded her hands in her lap, trying to project confidence she absolutely didn't feel. "The short version is, I need a more flexible schedule for the next year. The lawyers were supposed to work that out." "They worked it out all right. They offered to triple your salary in exchange for reducing you to part-time consulting." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same intensity he applied to evaluating new acquisitions. "Aria, what the hell is going on? Who are you marrying?" She couldn't tell him the truth, couldn't explain about the contract or the debt or the fact that she was essentially being paid to produce an heir for one of Chicago's most dangerous men. So she went with the only lie that made any sense. "His name is Lucien Moretti. He's older, very private, very wealthy. We met through mutual connections. It happened fast." "Moretti." Marcus's expression shifted, something between recognition and concern. "Lucien Moretti? The real estate developer?" "Among other things, yes. Real estate was probably the most legitimate of Lucien's various enterprises, the part he could discuss at dinner parties without making people nervous." "That's him." "Jesus, Aria, I've seen his name on donor lists. He's funded half the arts organizations in this city." Marcus shook his head slowly. "And now he's your fiancé." I don't even know what that is." "It's temporary," Aria said before she could stop herself. Then, realizing how that sounded, she amended. "I mean, the flexible schedule is temporary. Obviously, the marriage isn't. I just need some accommodation while we're getting settled." Marcus didn't look convinced, but he was too professional to press. "The offer's generous, more than generous. You'd still maintain your current projects, just with reduced in-office hours. We can make it work." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank your incredibly wealthy fiancé, who apparently thinks nothing of throwing money at problems." He paused. "Are you happy, Aria? Because you don't look happy." She thought about lying. Thought about painting on a smile and saying all the right things about love and commitment and exciting new chapters. But this was Marcus, who'd hired her when she had zero experience, who'd fought for her promotion when the board wanted someone with an Ivy League pedigree, who'd covered for her every time her father's emergencies had made her late or distracted. "Ask me in a year," she said quietly. Marcus nodded like that made perfect sense, which maybe it did. "The offer stands, part-time, triple salary, whenever you're ready to start. And Aria, if you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Understood?" "Understood." She left the gallery feeling oddly hollow, another piece of her old life restructured, bent to fit the new reality. How many more would there be before she didn't recognize herself at all? The next week passed in a blur of preparations that felt simultaneously surreal and mundane. Dress fittings at a boutique where the owner greeted Lucien by name and didn't bat an eye when he requested something elegant, not bridal, for Aria. Medical appointments where doctors asked invasive questions about her cycle and family history while Lucien sat in the waiting room reading financial reports. Dinners where he taught her the names and faces of his various business associates, describing each one with clinical precision. Lorenzo handles waste management, very loyal but stupid. Don't trust anything he says about art. Margaret runs the property development arm, brilliant, ruthless, probably plotting to take over the whole operation if I die before securing succession. Always that casual mention of his mortality, as if he were discussing the weather. They fell into a routine without quite meaning to. Breakfast together in the morning room where Lucien would read his newspaper and Aria would sketch in a notebook she'd found in the study he'd given her. The space was everything he'd promised. North-facing windows, good light, a desk that had probably cost more than her car. She'd started drawing again despite herself, her hands remembering the muscle memory of charcoal on paper. Evenings were stranger. Sometimes Lucien had meetings that kept him out until late. Other times, he'd appear in the library where Aria had taken to reading, pour them both drinks, and they'd talk. Not about the contract or the baby or anything consequential, just talk. About art, politics, books they'd read. He was better educated than she'd expected, with opinions on everything from Rothko to the Cubs' pitching rotation. "You played baseball?" Aria asked one night, genuinely surprised. "In another life, before I understood that violence was more profitable when organized." He swirled his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "I was good. Could have gone somewhere with it, maybe. But my father had other plans." "Your father was in this business, too." "My father was this business. Built it from nothing, immigrated from Sicily with $10 and a willingness to do things other people wouldn't. He taught me everything important: loyalty, strategy, how to read people. Also how to break fingers without leaving permanent damage, but that's a different skill set." Aria set down her book. "Do you miss him?" "Every day. And I hated him every day he was alive." Lucien met her eyes. "That's the thing about family, Miss Bennett. Love and resentment aren't mutually exclusive. You can feel both simultaneously, and neither cancels out the other." She thought about her father, about the complicated tangle of emotions that came with loving someone who kept hurting you. "Yeah, I'm starting to understand that." "Good. You'll need that understanding in the coming months." It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging what was waiting for them at the end of this strange honeymoon period, the actual consummation of their arrangement. The wedding itself was exactly as promised: brief, bureaucratic, emotionally sterile. They met at City Hall on a Thursday afternoon. Aria wore the dress from the boutique, a simple sheath in champagne silk that somehow made her look older, more sophisticated, like someone who'd chosen this. Lucien wore charcoal again because apparently that was his signature color. Two witnesses, Carlos and Constance, both looking like this was just another Thursday. The officiant was a woman in her 40s who'd clearly performed hundreds of these ceremonies and had long since stopped investing emotional energy in them. She ran through the standard vows with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "Do you, Lucien Moretti, take Aria Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Aria Bennett, take Lucien Moretti to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Aria looked at the man beside her. At 57, he was 31 years older than her, a stranger bound to her by contract and desperation. In a year, she'd walk away with $10 million and a child she hadn't planned for. In 4 years, if his doctors were right, he'd be dead. This was insane. This was necessary. This was her life now. "I do," she said. The officiant pronounced them married. Lucien slid a ring onto her finger, white gold, single diamond, tasteful and expensive. He'd had it sized perfectly without asking her measurements. Of course he had. They signed the marriage certificate. Carlos and Constance witnessed. And just like that, Aria Bennett became Aria Moretti. "You can kiss the bride," the officiant said, already reaching for the next couple's paperwork. Lucien turned to her, and for the first time since they'd met, Aria saw something like uncertainty in his expression. He was waiting for permission, she realized, following the boundary she'd set that first night. Aria tilted her face up, closing the distance between them. The kiss was brief, chaste, utterly devoid of passion. His lips were warm and dry against hers, and the whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. But something shifted in that moment, some final acknowledgement that this was real, that they'd crossed a line neither of them could uncross. When he pulled back, Lucien's eyes held something new. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition. "Mrs. Moretti," he said quietly. "Mr. Moretti," she replied. And that was it. They were married. The reception was even stranger than the ceremony. Lucien had arranged a dinner at Alinea, the kind of restaurant where reservations required months of planning and a willingness to spend more on one meal than most people spent on rent. The private dining room could seat 20, but there were only 8, Aria and Lucien, Carlos and Constance, and 4 of Lucien's closest associates. Lorenzo, the waste management guy who was loyal but stupid. Margaret, the property developer who was brilliant and ruthless. A man named Vincent who handled security and had the dead eyes of someone who'd seen too much violence. And Elena, Lucien's attorney, who'd witnessed the original contract and looked at Aria with something between pity and respect. They toasted the happy couple, ate 17 courses of molecular gastronomy that was more art than food, made polite conversation about everything except what this marriage actually was. Aria played her part perfectly, smiled at the right moments, touched Lucien's hand when it seemed appropriate, let him rest his palm at the small of her back when they stood for photographs that would probably end up in some society column she'd never read. To anyone watching, they were exactly what they appeared to be. A young woman who'd married well, and an older man who'd found himself a beautiful wife. The lie was so smooth it almost felt true. "You're good at this," Elena murmured during a lull in conversation. She was a striking woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and the kind of bone structure that made aging look aspirational. "Good at what?" "Playing the role. I've seen a lot of marriages in this world, honey. Most of them are business arrangements of one kind or another. But the successful ones are the ones where both parties commit to the performance." She sipped her wine, her gaze sharp. "You're committed. That's good. Lucien needs someone strong. Is strong or compliant? If he wanted compliant, he would have found someone decades ago. He wants strong. He just doesn't fully understand why yet." Elena set down her glass. "Can I give you some advice? Can I stop you?" That earned a genuine laugh. "I like you. Here's the thing about Lucien Moretti. He's brilliant, he's dangerous, and he's absolutely convinced he's going to die before he finishes what he started. That makes him focused and reckless in equal measure. He'll push you because he doesn't have time to be gentle. He'll test you because he needs to know you won't break. And underneath all of that, he's just a man who's terrified of dying alone." Aria glanced across the table where Lucien was deep in conversation with Vincent, his expression animated in a way she rarely saw. "He told me he doesn't believe in love." "He doesn't, but he believes in legacy, in leaving something behind that matters. That's why he needs an heir, and that's why he chose you specifically." "Because I was convenient?" "Because you're a survivor. He saw that the first night when you negotiated terms instead of begging for mercy. He respects that. Hell, I think it might be the closest he gets to attraction." Elena stood, smoothed her dress. "Make him work for it, honey. Don't give him anything he hasn't earned. Men like Lucien need to believe they've conquered something, or they lose interest." Then she drifted away, leaving Aria with the distinct impression that she'd just been given the keys to a kingdom she didn't want. They returned to the Gold Coast mansion near midnight. Aria's feet ached from the heels she'd been wearing for 8 hours, and her face hurt from smiling. She kicked off the shoes the moment they stepped inside, felt the cool marble beneath her bare feet. "Thank you," Lucien said. Aria turned to him. "For what?" "For tonight. For playing your part convincingly. My associates needed to believe this was legitimate, and you gave them no reason to doubt." He loosened his tie, and the gesture was so casually intimate it caught her off guard. "I know this isn't what you would have chosen, but you're handling it with more grace than I expected." "Did you expect me to break down crying during the ceremony?" "I expected you to run. Most people would have found a way out by now, gone to the police, contacted a lawyer, something. But you haven't. You're honoring the contract even though every instinct probably tells you to flee." Aria thought about that, about all the moments over the past week when she could have run, could have found someone to help her escape this arrangement. She'd had opportunities. Marcus would have helped. There were organizations that handled domestic situations, even complicated ones like this. But she hadn't run. Not because she was afraid, though fear was certainly part of it, but because some stubborn part of her refused to let this situation defeat her. Lucien Moretti had bought her time and her body, but he hadn't bought her surrender. And she was damned if she was going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her quit. "I don't run from things," she said finally. "I face them, I survive them, and I come out stronger. That's what I'm doing here." Something shifted in Lucien's expression, respect maybe, or recognition. "Then we're more alike than I initially thought." "Don't mistake survival for similarity. We're nothing alike." Aren't we? We're both doing whatever it takes to protect what matters to us. You're here for your father. I'm building a legacy for a child who doesn't exist yet. Different motivations, same fundamental drive. The difference is I didn't put anyone in this position. You did. True. He moved closer, and Aria forced herself not to step back. But that doesn't change the reality we're both living in now. We're married, Mrs. Moretti. For better or worse, and I suspect we'll see plenty of both, we're bound together. The question is what we make of it. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, see the fine lines around his eyes. Close enough that if this were a real marriage, this would be the moment for a kiss, for hands sliding around waists, for all the intimate gestures that came with being newlyweds. But it wasn't a real marriage. "Good night, Lucien," Aria said, stepping back deliberately. For a moment she thought he might push, might close the distance again, might test the boundaries she'd drawn. But he didn't. He just nodded, that slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good night, Aria. Sleep well." She climbed the stairs to her suite, locked the door even though she knew the lock was mostly symbolic, and finally let herself breathe. One day down, 364 to go. The next morning, Aria woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a key and a note in Lucien's precise handwriting. "The garage. Third bay. Consider it a wedding gift. L." She dressed quickly, descended to the garage where Lucien kept his collection of vehicles that probably cost more than most people's houses. The third bay held a midnight blue Audi sedan, new, elegant, completely impractical for Chicago winters, but beautiful nonetheless. Carlos appeared from somewhere, because apparently he was always nearby. "Mr. Moretti thought you might appreciate your own transportation. The car's registered in your name, insurance handled, everything legal." Aria ran her hand along the hood, feeling the cool metal beneath her palm. A cage, yes, but a very pretty cage with excellent German engineering. "He's good at this," she said, making the cage comfortable. Carlos's expression didn't change. "Mr. Moretti believes in taking care of his investments." "Is that what I am? An investment?" "You're his wife. That makes you family. And in this world, Mrs. Moretti, family is the only thing that matters." He handed her the keys. "Drive safe. The city's more dangerous than it looks." She spent the afternoon driving aimlessly through Chicago, learning the car's rhythms, reclaiming some small piece of autonomy. When she finally returned to the mansion, the sun was setting and Lucien was waiting in the library. "Do you like it?" he asked without preamble. "It's a beautiful cage." "Everything's a cage if you think about it hard enough. At least this one has heated seats." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. We need to discuss next steps." Aria settled into the leather chair, tucking her legs beneath her. "What next steps?" "You've been here almost 2 weeks. You've seen the house, met my key associates, established a routine. Now we need to address the actual purpose of this arrangement." He said it so clinically, as if they were discussing a business merger rather than creating a human life. "I'm not pushing for immediate action, but we should establish a timeline, parameters, how this is going to work." "You mean sex?" "I mean conception. Sex is simply the mechanism." Aria laughed. She couldn't help it. "You're possibly the least romantic person I've ever met." "Romance is a luxury neither of us can afford. I need an heir within the next 6 months. You need to fulfill your contractual obligations. Those are facts. How we get from here to there is what we're negotiating." "You can't negotiate consent, Lucien." "I'm not trying to. I'm trying to establish a framework where consent becomes possible, where you're comfortable enough, trust me enough, or at least hate me little enough to make a rational choice." He leaned forward. "I told you I wouldn't force you. I meant it. But I also won't wait forever. So I'm asking, what would it take? What do you need from me to make this bearable?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected demands, pressure, the kind of coercion that came wrapped in civility. Instead, he was asking her to define the terms of her own surrender. "Honesty," she said finally. "If we're going to do this, if I'm going to let you that close, I need to know who you really are. Not the businessman or the dying king building a legacy. The actual person underneath all of that." Lucien studied her for a long moment. "That's a dangerous request, Mrs. Moretti. You might not like what you find." I already don't like you. At least if I understand you, I'll know what I'm dealing with. Fair enough. He stood, moved to the bar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. What do you want to know? Everything. Start at the beginning. And to her surprise, he did. Lucien Moretti's story began the way most American crime dynasties did, with an immigrant who refused to starve. My father arrived in New York in 1949, Lucien said, settling deeper into his chair with the whiskey cradled in his palm. 23 years old, spoke maybe 50 words of English, had family connections in Sicily that meant exactly nothing in Brooklyn. He worked the docks for 3 years, saved every penny, and learned the most important lesson of his life. Legitimate work keeps you poor. Aria sipped her own whiskey, the burn coating her throat as she listened. Outside the library windows, Chicago glittered in the darkness, oblivious to the confessions happening in this room. By 1955, he'd moved into collections. Small-time stuff at first, enforcing debts for neighborhood bookies, making sure the numbers runners paid their percentages. He was good at it, not because he enjoyed violence, but because he understood mathematics. Pain is just another form of interest, and my father always collected in full. That's a disturbing way to describe assault. It's an honest way to describe the business model. Lucien's expression didn't change. He moved to Chicago in '58, brought my mother with him. She was pregnant with my older brother, Marco. I came along 2 years later, and by then, my father had established himself as someone you didn't cross. He ran protection rackets, controlled the garbage contracts for half the city, had his fingers in every construction project south of the Loop. And you grew up in that world. I grew up in 2 worlds. During the day, we were a respectable Italian family in Cicero. My mother went to church. My father owned a waste management consulting firm. And we had Sunday dinners with my grandmother who refused to learn English on principle. At night, he paused, swirling his drink. At night, my father taught us the family business. Marco was the golden child, the heir apparent. I was the spare, the one who'd handle logistics and strategy, while Marco provided the charisma and muscle. There was something in his voice when he mentioned his brother, something raw that he couldn't quite bury beneath the clinical detachment. What happened to Marco? Aria asked quietly. Lucien's jaw tightened. We'll get there. Let me finish the foundation first. He stood, moved to refill his glass even though it was still half full. The movement gave him an excuse not to look at her. I was good at school. Better than my father expected, better than Marco, who barely graduated high school. I went to Northwestern, studied economics and political science, and my father tolerated it because he thought I'd come back with useful skills. He was right, in a way. I learned how to launder money through legitimate businesses, how to structure organizations to insulate leadership from prosecution, how to read balance sheets and find the weaknesses. You were building the empire's foundation. I was turning my father's street-level operation into something that could survive scrutiny. By the time I graduated in 1990, we'd diversified: real estate development, restaurant supply chains, private security firms. All legitimate on paper, all providing cover for the traditional revenue streams. My father hated it at first. Thought I was going soft, losing the edge that made us dangerous. But when the FBI started their big organized crime push in the mid-90s, we were insulated. Our competitors went to prison. We thrived. Aria watched him carefully, noting the way his shoulders had tensed, how his free hand kept touching the burn scars on his knuckles. And Marco? Marco ran the street operations, collections, enforcement, the parts of the business that still required a visible threat. He was good at it, charismatic enough that people wanted to please him, violent enough that they feared disappointing him. We made a good team for almost 20 years. I handled the money and strategy. He handled the people and perception. Our father died in 2003, and we inherited everything together. Equally? Technically, yes. Practically, I controlled more because I understood more. Marco didn't care as long as he got to play the king. He liked the attention, the respect, the fear. I preferred the shadows. Lucien finally turned back to face her, and his expression was harder now, colder. In 2008, we had a problem. One of our partners in the Teamsters was skimming. Not much, maybe $50,000 over 6 months, but enough that it couldn't go unanswered. Marco wanted to handle it personally, make an example. I told him it was a bad idea, that we had systems for this kind of thing, people who handled problems quietly. He didn't listen. He never listened when his pride was involved. He took 2 of his guys, went to the partner's house in Naperville, and beat him to death in front of his wife and daughter. Lucien's voice was flat, emotionless, as if he were reciting someone else's story. The wife called the police. The daughter identified Marco in a lineup. We had judges and prosecutors on the payroll, but this was too public, too messy. The media picked it up. Suddenly, we weren't respectable businessmen anymore. We were the mob. Aria felt something cold settle in her stomach. What did you do? I did what I always did. I fixed it. Got Marco out on bail, prepared to bury the case in procedural delays and witness intimidation. It would have worked too, except Marco decided he was untouchable, started getting sloppy, trusting the wrong people, making promises he couldn't keep. And someone took advantage. His own lieutenant, a man named Sal Benedito, who'd worked for our family for 15 years. Sal went to the FBI, offered testimony in exchange for immunity. But he needed leverage first, needed something that would force the Bureau to take him seriously. Lucien's hand tightened around his glass, the knuckles going white. He knew the one thing Marco loved more than himself was his son, my nephew, Paolo. 8 years old, loved baseball, collected comic books, thought his father was a hero. The room seemed to contract around them, the air growing heavier. Sal took him, Lucien continued, his voice eerily calm. Grabbed him from school, held him for 3 days while he negotiated his deal with the FBI. They promised him witness protection, a new identity, the works. All he had to do was deliver Marco Moretti on a platter, but first he had to make sure Marco couldn't retaliate. Aria's hand went to her mouth. She knew where this was going, could feel the inevitability of it like a physical weight. They found Paolo in a drainage ditch near Gary, Indiana. He'd been dead for at least 24 hours. Single gunshot to the back of the head, execution style, clean, professional, the kind of thing that sent a message. This is what happens when you trust the wrong people. My God, Aria whispered. God had nothing to do with it. This was pure human calculation. Sal eliminated the leverage Marco might have used to find him, traumatized my brother into recklessness, and delivered himself to the FBI as a star witness all in one move. It was brilliant, really. Brutal, unforgivable, but brilliant. Lucien finally sat back down, and for the first time since she'd met him, Aria saw actual emotion crack through his controlled exterior. Not grief, that had probably been buried years ago, but something darker, something that looked like rage preserved in ice. Marco fell apart, started drinking, stopped showing up to meetings, made threats against anyone he thought might have been involved. The organization was hemorrhaging money and credibility. Our lawyers were terrified he'd do something that would expose everyone. And Sal was out there somewhere, protected by federal marshals, probably laughing at what he'd done. What did Marco want to do? He wanted war, wanted to burn everything down, expose every corrupt cop and judge we'd ever paid, blow up the whole system in a murder-suicide that would destroy decades of work our father had built. Lucien met her eyes. I couldn't let that happen. The silence stretched between them, loaded with implications Aria didn't want to examine too closely. You killed him, she said finally. Not a question. I saved the organization, saved hundreds of families who depended on the businesses we controlled, saved myself from going down with him. His voice was completely steady. Marco had become a liability, an unstable, grief-stricken liability who was going to get us all killed or imprisoned. So I did what had to be done. How? The word came out barely above a whisper. Does it matter? He's dead, the organization survived, and I've been running things alone for the past 16 years. That's the relevant outcome. But Aria pressed. If you want honesty between us, then be honest. How did you kill your own brother? Lucien studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, there was something almost like resignation there. Carbon monoxide. His car, his garage, late at night when he was too drunk to know what was happening. I made sure he fell asleep in the driver's seat, closed the garage door, and waited outside until it was finished. Then I called it in as a suicide, grieving father who couldn't live with his son's death. The autopsy confirmed high blood alcohol, the scene supported the narrative, and everyone was too relieved to ask hard questions. Everyone except you. I don't have the luxury of doubt. I made a choice, I executed it, and I've lived with the consequences for 16 years. That's who I am, Aria. A man who killed his own brother because it was pragmatic. A man who can compartmentalize grief and guilt and keep moving forward because stopping means everything falls apart. Aria felt like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the controlled businessman or the dying king, but the actual person underneath. Someone who'd been forged in violence and loss and impossible choices, who'd carved out his own survival at a cost most people couldn't imagine. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Every single day, and I'd do it again tomorrow if I had to." He finished his whiskey in one swallow. "That's the thing about this life, Mrs. Moretti. Regret is just another luxury you can't afford. You make the hard choice, you live with it, and you don't let it stop you from making the next one." "And Sal? What happened to him?" A smile ghosted across Lucien's face. Brief, cold, utterly devoid of warmth. "Witness protection is good, but it's not perfect. It took me 9 years, but I found him. Living in Oregon under a new name, working at a hardware store, married to a woman who had no idea who he'd been. I could have killed him. Should have, probably, for what he did to Paolo. But you didn't. I did something worse. I destroyed his new life piece by piece. Anonymous tips to his employer about his past. Letters to his wife detailing exactly who she'd married. Constant reminders that I knew where he was, that I could reach him any time I wanted. He lived in terror for 3 years before he finally put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger." Lucien's expression was completely neutral. "Sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone isn't killing them. It's letting them live with what they've done." Aria felt sick, not just from the story, but from the casual way he told it, as if he were describing a successful business strategy rather than years of calculated psychological torture. "You're a monster," she said. Not angry, just stating a fact. "Yes, I warned you about that." He stood, moved to pour himself another drink. "But I'm a monster who keeps his word. I told you I'd be honest, and I have been. This is who you married, Aria. This is the man whose child you've agreed to carry. A man who's killed, who's destroyed lives, who's built an empire on other people's suffering and doesn't lose sleep over it. How can you live with yourself? The same way you're living with your choice to be here. I focus on what matters, legacy, continuity, making sure that when I die, something of value remains. Paolo's death, Marco's death, all the other deaths I've been responsible for, they can't be undone. But I can make sure they meant something, that the organization they died for, or died because of, survives and thrives and provides for the people who depend on it." He was rationalizing, Aria knew, building elaborate structures of justification around actions that were fundamentally indefensible. But she also heard something else in his voice. Exhaustion. Beneath all the control and calculation, Lucien Moretti was tired. Tired of the wait, tired of the choices, tired of being the man who always had to do the terrible thing because no one else would. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked. "You could have kept it hidden. Let me believe you were just a businessman who bent some rules. Why give me ammunition?" "Because you asked for honesty, and I don't believe in building on false foundations. If we're going to do this, really do this, you need to know exactly who I am, what I'm capable of, what I've done." He moved closer, and Aria forced herself to hold her ground. "And because I need you to understand that when I promise to protect you and our child, I mean it absolutely. I will do anything, anything, to keep you safe. The same ruthlessness I used against my brother, I will use for you. That's the deal." That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you feel secure. I won't let anyone hurt you, Aria. Not my enemies, not random chance, not even yourself. You're under my protection now, and I don't fail at protecting what's mine." The possessiveness in that last word should have frightened her. Maybe it did, a little, but there was also something oddly comforting about it. The knowledge that this man, for all his monstrousness, had never failed to deliver on a promise. "I need time to process this," Aria said finally. "Take all the time you need. But understand that time is the one resource we're both running out of. My doctors gave me 4 years if I'm lucky. The contract gives us 6 months for conception. The world doesn't stop moving because we need to feel comfortable." He was right, and she hated that he was right. I'm going to bed, she announced, setting down her glass with more force than necessary. Thank you for the honesty, even if I wish I could unhear most of it. Aria. His voice stopped her at the door. I know I'm asking the impossible, asking you to see past the monster to the man, to trust someone who's proven he can't be trusted, to give yourself to someone who's taken everything from you. But I'm asking anyway. Because despite everything, despite the contract and the coercion and all of it, I think you're the only person in my life who might actually understand. Understand what? What it's like to make impossible choices and live with them. What it's like to love someone who keeps destroying themselves and having to save them anyway. What it's like to be strong when every instinct says to break. He paused. You're more like me than you want to admit, Mrs. Moretti. That's why this might actually work. Aria left without responding, but his words followed her up the stairs and into her suite. The next few weeks were strange and tense and oddly intimate, despite the careful distance they maintained. Lucien seemed to have taken her request for time seriously. He didn't push, didn't pressure, didn't even mention the contract or their timeline. Instead, he simply existed in her orbit, having breakfast together, sharing the library in the evenings, occasionally asking her opinion on art acquisitions for his various properties. It was domestic in a way Aria hadn't expected. Not comfortable exactly, but functional. They learned each other's rhythms, developed small routines. She discovered he was compulsively punctual and hated small talk. He learned she was terrible at mornings and had strong opinions about coffee preparation. You're grinding it too fine, Aria said one morning, watching him make espresso with the kind of focus most people reserve for surgery. It'll be bitter. Lucien adjusted the grinder without argument. Show me. And she did, her hands moving automatically through the motions her mother had taught her years ago. The right grind, the proper tamp, the exact temperature. When she handed him the finished cup, he tasted it with genuine attention. Better, he admitted. Where did you learn that? My mother. She was obsessed with coffee, used to say it was the only luxury she could afford that didn't require explanation or apology. Aria made her own cup, the ritual soothing in its familiarity. She died when I was 12. Aneurysm, completely unexpected. One morning she was fine, that afternoon she was gone. And your father fell apart. He'd been falling apart for years. She was just the glue holding him together. After she died, there was nothing to stop the spiral. Aria sipped her coffee, let the warmth spread through her. I learned to take care of myself early, learned that the only person you can really rely on is you. Lucien was quiet for a moment. Is that why you're handling this so well? Because you've been alone for so long that one more impossible situation is just Tuesday? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just good at pretending I'm fine until I actually am. She met his eyes. You do the same thing. The control, the compartmentalization, it's just another form of survival. Shared trauma bonding. How romantic. Despite herself, Aria laughed. We should put that on our anniversary cards. The ease of the moment surprised them both. For just a second, they weren't captor and captive, monster and victim, businessman and transaction. They were just two damaged people who understood each other in a way that was probably unhealthy but undeniably real. Then Lucien's phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered with his usual clipped efficiency. Moretti. His expression shifted as he listened, going from neutral to dangerously cold in the space of a breath. When? Who was there? No, don't move anything. I'm coming now. He hung up, already moving toward the door. What's wrong? Aria asked. One of my properties was hit last night. Warehouse in Bridgeport, $20 million in inventory gone. 2 of my men in the hospital. He was pulling on his jacket, his movements sharp with controlled fury. This was coordinated, professional. Someone's making a move. On you? On everything I've built. Stay here. Carlos will be outside if you need anything. Don't leave the house until I get back. Lucien. But he was already gone, the front door closing behind him with decisive finality. Aria stood in the kitchen, her coffee growing cold in her hands, and felt the first real stirrings of fear since she'd signed the contract. Because Lucien Moretti being in danger meant she was in danger. Their fates were bound now, for better or worse. And if someone was coming for him, they were coming for her too. She spent the day trying to distract herself. Went to the study, attempted to sketch, ended up just staring at blank paper. Called Marcus at the gallery, made small talk about an upcoming exhibition, hung up feeling more disconnected than ever. By evening, when Lucien still hadn't returned, Aria was pacing the library like a caged animal. Carlos appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Moretti." "Mr. Moretti called. He'll be late tonight, possibly early morning. He asked me to make sure you ate dinner." "I'm not hungry." He was quite specific about the eating dinner part. Aria wanted to argue, wanted to throw something, wanted to scream that she wasn't some delicate flower who needed managing. But Carlos was just following orders, and taking out her frustration on him would accomplish nothing. "Fine. Tell Constance I'll eat in my room." She picked at the meal when it arrived. Some kind of chicken with vegetables that probably tasted amazing but might as well have been cardboard for all she noticed. Her mind kept circling back to Lucien's expression when he'd gotten that call. The cold fury, the immediate shift into command mode. This was the man who'd killed his own brother, who'd spent 9 years psychologically destroying someone for revenge. What would he do to whoever had hit his warehouse? Aria didn't want to know, but she couldn't stop imagining it. She was still awake at 2 a.m. when she heard the front door open. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and heavy. Then, unexpectedly, a knock on her door. "Aria? Are you awake?" She opened the door to find Lucien leaning against the frame, his tie gone, his shirt partially unbuttoned, traces of blood on his collar that she really hoped wasn't his. "Are you all right?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Define all right." His voice was rough, exhausted. "The warehouse situation is handled. The men responsible have been educated about the consequences of theft. My guys in the hospital will survive. The inventory's a loss, but I've got insurance for that." "The blood?" "Not mine. Don't worry about it." He pushed off the door frame, swayed slightly. "I shouldn't have come up here. You were probably sleeping." "I wasn't." Aria stepped aside. "Come in. You look like you need to sit down before you fall down." He shouldn't have accepted. Should have gone to his own suite, maintained the boundaries they'd carefully established. But he came in anyway, settling onto the small sofa by her fireplace with the grateful sigh of someone who'd been upright for too many hours. Aria poured him water from the carafe on her nightstand. "Drink this. When's the last time you ate?" "Breakfast." "Your excellent coffee." He took the water, drained half the glass. "I'm not used to having someone worry about me." "I'm not worrying. I'm maintaining an investment. You die before fulfilling the contract. This whole year is wasted." But it was a lie, and they both knew it. Somewhere between the confessions and the coffee lessons and the small domestic moments, Aria had started to care whether Lucien Moretti lived or died. Not love. She wasn't anywhere close to that and might never be. But something more complicated than pure self-interest. "Whoever hit the warehouse," Lucien said quietly, "they were sending a message, testing my response time, seeing how weak I've become. There are people who know about my diagnosis, who think I'm vulnerable now. They're wrong, but they won't stop testing." What does that mean for us? It means I need to accelerate my timeline, need to show strength, shore up alliances, make it clear that attacking me is still suicide. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something raw in his expression. And it means I need that air sooner rather than later, because the best way to prove I'm not dying is to prove I'm building for the future. Aria's stomach tightened. "We still have 3 months. I know, and I'm not demanding anything tonight, but I need you to understand the stakes. This isn't just about you and me anymore. There are people watching, waiting for weakness, ready to tear apart everything I've built the second they sense vulnerability. So I'm supposed to get pregnant to prove you're still strong? That's insane. It's strategy, and whether you like it or not, you're part of that strategy now. You're my wife, Aria. That makes you a target and a symbol in equal measure." He was right, and she hated it. Hated that her body had become a chess piece in someone else's game. Hated that the choice she'd made to save her father had snowballed into this, into being part of a power structure she didn't understand and couldn't control. "I need more time," she said, but it sounded weak even to her own ears. "I know. And I'll give you as much as I can. But time is the one thing neither of us has in abundance." Lucien stood, steadier now after the water and the brief rest. "Thank you for letting me in, for listening, for caring, even if you don't want to admit that's what you're doing." "I don't care." Liar. But he said it gently, without judgment. Get some sleep, Mrs. Moretti. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. He left, and Aria was alone again with her thoughts and the growing realization that she was in far deeper than she'd ever intended to be. The next morning brought fresh complications in the form of Margaret Chen, the property development executive Lucien had introduced at the wedding dinner. Aria found her in the breakfast room with Lucien. The two of them bent over spreadsheets and architectural drawings like generals planning an invasion. Ah, Aria, perfect timing. Lucien gestured her to join them. Margaret's been developing a new property in River North, high-end residential, commercial space on the ground floors. I'd like your opinion on the common areas. My opinion? You're a curator. You understand how people interact with space, what makes an environment feel welcoming versus sterile. Margaret's designs are functionally sound but aesthetically corporate. Margaret didn't even look offended. He's right. I can build a structure that won't fall down, but making it beautiful? That's not my gift. Aria studied the renderings, her trained eye picking out the problems immediately. The lighting was harsh, the color palette cold, the furniture arrangements meant for photographs rather than actual human use. This feels like a hotel lobby, not a place where people actually live, she said. You need warmth, natural materials, varied lighting, spaces that invite lingering rather than just passage. For the next hour, she found herself sketching alternatives, suggesting artists whose work might complement the architecture, explaining the psychology of color and form. Margaret took notes with the focused intensity of someone who recognized expertise when she saw it, and Lucien watched with something that looked almost like pride. When Margaret finally left with a portfolio of Aria's suggestions and a promise to consult on future projects, Lucien turned to her with a slight smile. You're good at that. I'd forgotten. You actually have a career, actual skills beyond what I'm using you for. Thanks for noticing. I'm serious. Margaret doesn't listen to anyone except me, and she took every suggestion you made. That's rare. He paused. There's a gallery opening tomorrow night. Contemporary photography, some local artists mixed with international names. Would you like to go? Not as an obligation, just because you might actually enjoy it. It was the first time he'd suggested something that had nothing to do with the contract or appearances or strategy, just a genuine offer based on her interests. With you? Aria asked. With me? Yes. Unless you'd prefer to go alone, which I can arrange. She thought about it, about spending an evening in a space she loved, surrounded by art instead of anxiety, and about what it meant that she didn't immediately hate the idea of Lucien being there with her. Together, she said finally. But if you try to buy something just to impress me, I'm leaving. Noted. No impressive purchases, completely restrained billionaire behavior only. Despite everything, Aria smiled. The gallery was exactly what she needed. White walls, dramatic lighting, photographs that ranged from breathtaking to deliberately unsettling. Lucien stayed close, but not suffocating, letting her move through the space at her own pace while he fielded calls and texts from people who apparently couldn't function without his input for more than 2 hours. They were standing in front of a massive print, Chicago at night, shot from above, the city's grid glowing like a circuit board, when a voice behind them made Aria freeze. Well, Lucien Moretti, I heard you'd gotten married, but I had to see it to believe it. Aria turned to find a man in his early 40s, expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive everything. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Dominic. Lucien's voice was carefully neutral. I didn't know you were interested in photography. I'm interested in a lot of things, including who exactly captured the heart of Chicago's most eligible widower. Dominic's gaze slid to Aria, assessing and dismissive in the same glance. You must be the new Mrs. Moretti. I'm Dominic Caruso. My family has business relationships with Lucien's organization. The way he said it made it clear that business relationships meant something far less cordial than the words implied. Aria, she said, not offering her hand. Charming, and so young. Tell me, how did you two meet? I'm dying to hear the story. We're not here to provide entertainment, Dominic. Lucien's hand settled at the small of Aria's back, a gesture of possession and protection. If you'll excuse us, actually, I'm glad I ran into you. Saves me a phone call. Dominic's smile never wavered. I heard about the incident at your Bridgeport warehouse. Terrible business. My condolences on the loss. The loss was minimal. The people responsible have been dealt with. I'm sure they have. You've always been so thorough about sending messages. Dominic pulled out his phone, tapped something, then showed Lucien the screen. But here's the thing about messages. Sometimes they get misinterpreted. Aria couldn't see what was on the phone, but she saw Lucien's expression harden into something dangerous. Where did you get this? Lucien's voice was deadly quiet. Oh, you know how it is. Information circulates. People talk. And when they talk, they start wondering things. Like whether the great Lucien Moretti is as strong as he used to be. Whether maybe it's time for new leadership, new alliances. Dominic pocketed his phone. Just thought you should know what people are saying, as a courtesy, between old friends. We've never been friends. No, but we could be. Or we could be something else. The choice, as always, is yours. Dominic nodded to Aria. Lovely to meet you, Mrs. Moretti. Enjoy the art. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving a tension in his wake that made Aria's skin crawl. What was that about? She asked quietly. That was a declaration of war. Lucien's hand tightened briefly on her back, then released. Come on, we're leaving. But we just got here. Now, Aria. The drive home was silent and tense. Lucien made 3 phone calls, each one shorter and more clipped than the last. Carlos drove with the kind of focused alertness that suggested he was prepared for trouble. Back at the mansion, Lucien went straight to his office and closed the door. Aria stood in the foyer, unsure whether to follow or give him space. The decision was made for her when the office door opened and Lucien called out, Aria, I need you to see something. She found him behind his desk, laptop open, his expression grim. What Dominic showed me, he said without preamble, was surveillance footage from the warehouse hit. Whoever did it wore masks, but they knew exactly where the cameras were, exactly how to avoid identification. That takes inside information. You have a mole. I have a traitor. And based on the timing and access required, it's someone close, someone I trust. He turned the laptop toward her, showed her frozen frames from the footage. This isn't just about stealing inventory. This is about exposing weaknesses, proving I can't protect my own interests. And if I can't protect my interests, I definitely can't protect my wife. The implication hung in the air between them. They're going to come after me, Aria said. Not if I find them first. But yes, you're a target now, which means security protocols change as of tonight. Carlos will be with you whenever you leave the house. No exceptions. Your phone gets monitored. Your movements get tracked. I know it sounds like prison, but it sounds like survival. Aria sank into the chair across from him. Do what you have to do. I'm not interested in dying to prove a point about freedom. Lucien studied her for a long moment. You're taking this remarkably well. I'm terrified, but falling apart won't help either of us. So tell me what I need to know, what I need to do, and I'll do it. You need to know that this is going to get worse before it gets better. The Caruso family has been looking for an opening for years. They see my diagnosis as weakness, our marriage as desperation. They're going to push hard, and I'm going to have to push back harder. What does that mean? It means people are going to die, Aria. It means I'm going to do things that will give you nightmares, and you're going to have to live with the knowledge that you're married to the man doing them. Can you handle that? She thought about her father, about the choices she'd already made, about how far she'd already compromised herself just to get to this point. I don't have a choice, she said. So yes, I can handle it. Lucien's expression softened fractionally. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You didn't sign up for a war. I signed up for a year with a dangerous man. War was probably always in the fine print. Despite the gravity of the situation, that earned a faint smile. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, Mrs. Moretti. Don't mistake survival for strength. I'm just good at adapting. That's exactly what strength is. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them both. Then Aria stood, smoothed her dress, and made a decision she'd been avoiding for weeks. Come to my room tonight, she said. Lucien's head snapped up. What? You need an heir. I need to fulfill my contract. And if we're heading into a war, we might not have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions. She met his eyes steadily. I'm not saying I'm ready. I'm saying I'm willing. There's a difference, but under the circumstances, it'll have to be enough. Aria, Don't argue with me. Don't try to be noble about it. You were right earlier. We're out of time. So let's stop pretending and just do this." She left before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Back in her suite, she paced, second-guessed, nearly called down to tell him she'd changed her mind a dozen times. But when the knock came on her door 2 hours later, she opened it. Lucien stood in the hallway, still dressed, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with the quiet finality of a choice neither of them could take back. The thing Aria would remember most about that night wasn't the mechanics of it, or even the awkwardness of two near strangers trying to create something intimate out of pure necessity. It was the surprising gentleness in Lucien's hands as he touched her face, the way he'd asked, "Are you all right?" 3 separate times, and the fact that when it was over, he didn't immediately leave. They lay in the darkness of her room, the city lights filtering through the curtains, neither quite sure what came next in a situation like this. "That was," Lucien started, then stopped. "Transactional," Aria supplied. "I was going to say not as terrible as it could have been, but your version works too." He shifted beside her, and she felt him hesitate before adding, "Thank you. I know that doesn't make this less complicated, but thank you." Aria stared at the ceiling, processing the surreal reality that she'd just slept with a man she barely knew, a man who'd essentially bought her, a man who'd confessed to fratricide and psychological torture and didn't lose sleep over it. And yet, somehow, it hadn't been the nightmare she'd anticipated. It had been careful, almost considerate, and infinitely stranger because of it. "You can go back to your room now," she said quietly. "We don't have to pretend this was anything more than what it was." "I know." But he didn't move. "Can I ask you something?" "Why tonight? You could have waited longer, made me work harder for it. Why give in now?" Aria turned her head to look at him, this man who was her husband-in-law and stranger in practice, whose profile in the dim light looked almost vulnerable. "Because I'm tired of feeling powerless. At least this way it was my choice. My timing. I took back some small piece of control in a situation where I have almost none." Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're extraordinary. You know that?" "I'm surviving. There's a difference." "No, surviving is what most people do. They endure, they cope, they get through it. You're actively engaging, finding angles, refusing to be just a victim of circumstance. That's extraordinary." Despite herself, despite everything, Aria felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not love, nothing even close, but recognition. He saw her in a way few people ever had, saw past the surface to the calculations and strategies she'd been deploying since she was 12 years old. "Go to sleep, Lucien," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated enough without us overthinking tonight." He did leave then, pressing a brief kiss to her forehead that felt more intimate than everything that had preceded it. And Aria was alone again, her body strange and unfamiliar, her mind racing with implications she wasn't ready to examine. She fell asleep sometime before dawn and woke to sunlight and the surreal knowledge that everything had changed, even if nothing looked different. The next few weeks developed a rhythm that was equal parts domestic and dystopian. Mornings, they had breakfast together, and Lucien would brief her on the security situation like she was a member of his war council rather than a hostage. The Caruso family was making moves, testing boundaries, poaching clients, spreading rumors about Lucien's declining health and grip on power. 3 more properties had been hit, though nothing as significant as the Bridgeport warehouse. 2 of Lucien's mid-level guys had been approached with buyout offers, and someone had leaked details about the organization's structure to a journalist at the Tribune, though Lucien's lawyers had managed to kill the story before publication. "They're trying to bleed us," Lucien explained one morning, his coffee untouched as he scrolled through reports on his tablet. "Death by 1,000 cuts. Make me look weak. Make my people question whether I can still protect them. Create enough chaos that when they make their real move, nobody fights back." "What's the real move?" Aria asked. "Probably me. Kill me, claim it was natural causes or an accident, and in the resulting power vacuum, absorb the pieces of my organization they want and destroy the rest." He set down the tablet, met her eyes. "Which is why the air matters so much. If I have a child, If there's visible, undeniable proof of continuity, it makes assassination significantly less attractive. They'd have to deal with me and the infrastructure protecting my legacy. So I'm a human shield. You're the future. There's a difference. Aria wasn't sure she agreed, but she was learning to pick her battles. The nights were stranger still. After that first time, she'd expected Lucien to demand a schedule, to treat conception like the transactional process it was. Instead, he waited for her to invite him. Sometimes she did, not because she wanted to exactly, but because the waiting felt worse than the doing. And sometimes she didn't, and he accepted it without complaint or pressure. When he did come to her room, it was always careful, always controlled, always followed by conversations in the dark that revealed more than either of them probably intended. She learned about his first wife, Isabella, who died giving birth to their daughter, about the grief that had nearly destroyed him and how he'd locked it away so thoroughly that he sometimes forgot it was there. "I loved her," he said one night, his voice rough with old pain. "Actually loved her, not this practical arrangement we have. And when she died, when they both died, I swore I'd never let myself care that much again. It's too destructive, too consuming. Better to keep everything transactional, manageable, under control." Is that why you chose this route? The contract? The clinical approach? Partly. And partly because I genuinely don't have time for courtship and romance. I'm dying, Aria. That's not metaphorical or dramatic, it's medical fact. Every day I waste on sentiment is a day I'm not securing the future. He turned to look at her in the darkness. Does that make me a monster or just realistic? Both, probably. You can be two things at once. Apparently I can be many things at once. Businessman, criminal, husband, dying man, monster, pragmatist. He paused. What are you? Beyond survivor and victim and all the easy labels. Aria thought about that. I don't know anymore. I used to know exactly who I was. Art curator, daughter, woman with a plan. Now I'm your wife, your incubator, a piece on someone else's chessboard. I'm becoming someone I don't recognize, and I'm not sure if that's adaptation or erosion. For what it's worth, I recognize you. You're still the woman who negotiated terms at gunpoint, who draws boundaries and enforces them, who turned a terrible situation into something you could live with. That person hasn't gone anywhere. It was meant to be comforting, she thought, but it just made her feel more lost. 6 weeks after that first night, Aria took a pregnancy test in the marble bathroom of her suite and watched 2 pink lines appear with a strange mix of relief and dread. She stared at the plastic stick for a long time, trying to process what it meant. Success, by the contract's terms. A child growing inside her that she'd never planned for, carrying the DNA of a man she'd known for less than 3 months. The future Lucien was so desperate to secure, made real in a way that couldn't be undone. She should tell him immediately, should march downstairs and deliver the news like a progress report. Objective achieved, air in production, please update the timeline accordingly. But she didn't. Instead, she hid the test in the back of a drawer and went through the next 2 days trying to figure out how she felt about it. Not happy, certainly. Not devastated either, though there was grief in there somewhere. Grief for the life she wasn't going to have, the choices this closed off, the version of herself who'd imagined children coming from love rather than contract. Mostly, she felt numb, like she was watching someone else's life happen from a great distance. It was Constance who noticed first. The house manager appeared in Aria's study on the 3rd day, carrying tea and an expression that suggested she'd seen this particular movie before and knew how it ended. "Mrs. Moretti," she said, setting down the tea service with her usual efficiency, "I've taken the liberty of scheduling you an appointment with Dr. Chen for Friday morning. She's an excellent obstetrician, very discreet, and she handles all of Mr. Moretti's medical matters personally." Aria's hand froze halfway to the teacup. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Constance's expression softened fractionally. "But when you're ready to know, Dr. Chen will be available. Friday at 9. I've cleared your calendar." Then she left, and Aria was alone with the tea and the inescapable knowledge that nothing stayed secret in Lucien Moretti's house. She told him that night. They were in the library, Lucien working through contracts while Aria pretended to read. The silence had stretched comfortable and familiar when she finally set down her book and said, "I'm pregnant." Lucien's pen stopped moving. He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. You're certain? 3 tests, and apparently Constance, who's already scheduled me with an obstetrician. Aria folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Congratulations. You're going to be a father. Again. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at her like he was trying to read a text written in a language he'd forgotten. Then he stood, crossed to her chair, and did something completely unexpected. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. How do you feel? He asked quietly. I don't know. Numb. Terrified. Like I've just signed away another piece of myself I can't get back. She met his eyes. How do you feel? Relieved. Terrified. Like maybe I actually have a chance at getting this right. His grip tightened on her hands. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know I took this choice from you, but I swear to you, Aria, I will protect this child with everything I have. I will make sure they never want for anything, never suffer because of my choices, never have to live the life I've lived. You can't promise that. You're dying, remember? In 4 years, maybe less, you'll be gone and I'll be raising your child alone. Then I'll make those 4 years count. I'll build something so secure, so protected, that my death won't matter. The child will have money, power, legitimacy, and you— He paused, his voice rough. You'll have everything the contract promised, and more. I'll make sure of it. Aria wanted to pull her hands away, to retreat back into the safe distance she'd been maintaining. But something in his expression stopped her. He looked almost hopeful, this man who'd spent decades building walls against hope. And despite everything, despite the coercion and the contract and all of it, she found she didn't want to take that away from him. Okay, she said softly. We'll figure it out. Together. Lucien closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were suspiciously bright. Together. Yes. He stood, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and then surprised her again by wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt genuinely protective rather than possessive. Aria let herself lean into it just for a moment, and tried not to think about how easy it would be to mistake this for real affection. The appointment with Dr. Chen confirmed what the drugstore tests had already told her. 6 weeks pregnant, healthy vital signs, due date in late December. The doctor was professional and kind, explaining everything in terms that assumed Aria had chosen this pregnancy rather than had it negotiated into a contract. Lucien attended the appointment, asking questions about risk factors and prenatal care with the focus of someone preparing for battle. When Dr. Chen showed them the ultrasound, a tiny blob on the screen that barely looked human, his hand found Aria's and squeezed tight. There, Dr. Chen said, pointing to a flickering spot. That's the heartbeat, strong and steady. Everything looks perfect. Aria stared at the screen, trying to feel something maternal, something beyond the abstract knowledge that her body was now doing something irreversible. That tiny flicker was going to become a person who would call her mother, who would exist because she'd signed a contract to save her father from his own stupidity. The weight of it was crushing. Are you all right? Lucien asked quietly as they left the clinic. Ask me in 8 months. He didn't push, just guided her to the car where Carlos waited. But Aria could feel his attention on her. Not controlling or demanding, just present. Like he was trying to figure out how to navigate this new territory they'd stumbled into. Back at the mansion, Aria retreated to her study and tried to sketch. But her hands wouldn't cooperate, producing nothing but anxious scratches that went nowhere. She was staring at the ruined page when her phone rang. Marcus, from the gallery. Aria, finally! I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. He sounded excited, which was rare enough to cut through her fog. Listen, I just got off the phone with the director at the Morgan Gallery in New York. They saw the work you did on Margaret Chen's River North project, and they want to talk to you about consulting on their new contemporary wing. This is huge, Aria. The Morgan is one of the most prestigious— I can't, she said automatically. Silence. Then carefully, you can't, or your husband won't let you. I can't because I'm pregnant and about to be consumed by that for the next year. After that, maybe. But right now, I can't take on anything new. More silence. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was gentle. Aria, are you okay? And I mean really okay, not everything's fine, okay. She wanted to lie, wanted to paint on the happy facade and pretend that everything was going according to some plan she'd actually chosen. But this was Marcus, who'd been her friend before he was her boss, who'd seen her through her father's worst episodes and never judged. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if I'm okay or if I'm ever going to be okay again, or if okay is even a relevant concept anymore. I'm just existing, one day at a time. That's enough. Existing is enough." He paused. "The offer will keep. When you're ready, if you're ready, the Morgan will still be interested. And Aria, you're allowed to want things for yourself, even in the middle of whatever complicated situation you're in. Don't forget that." She hung up feeling both better and worse, which seemed to be her default state these days. The news of the pregnancy changed things in ways Aria hadn't anticipated. Within the organization, it was treated like a coronation. Lucien's people started calling her Mrs. M with a deference that suggested she'd been elevated to something more than just the boss's wife. Margaret sent flowers and a note congratulating her on securing the future. Even Carlos, perpetually stoic Carlos, smiled when he saw her and started insisting she let him carry anything heavier than a purse. "This is ridiculous," Aria muttered one morning as Carlos intercepted her attempt to carry her own coffee cup from the kitchen. "I'm pregnant, not disabled." "Mr. Moretti was very specific about making sure you don't strain yourself," Carlos replied, his expression suggesting he was reciting orders. "And what Mr. Moretti wants, Mr. Moretti gets. Does he want you to chew my food for me too, or can I still handle that independently?" That earned a rare laugh. "You're good for him, you know. I've worked for Mr. Moretti for 15 years, and I've never seen him care about anything the way he cares about making sure you're safe. But he cares about the air. He cares about you. The air is important, but you're different." Carlos handed her the coffee. "Don't underestimate what that means, Mrs. M." But Aria wasn't sure she wanted to be different, or cared about, or whatever it was that made Lucien Moretti look at her like she was simultaneously precious and fragile. It complicated things in ways the original contract had never accounted for. The Caruso family, however, saw the pregnancy as something else entirely, an opportunity. It started small. A few pointed comments at social events, whispers that Lucien had trapped some naive young woman into bearing his child, speculation about whether the baby was even his or if this was all an elaborate con. Lucien ignored it, which was apparently the wrong move because the whispers grew louder. Then came the direct approach. Aria was leaving the gallery after a consultation meeting when a black town car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Dominic Caruso's sharp smile. "Mrs. Moretti, what a pleasant surprise. Can I offer you a ride?" "I have a car, thank you." Aria glanced around for Carlos, who was supposed to be shadowing her but had apparently stepped away for a moment. "I insist. Just a brief conversation. 5 minutes of your time." Dominic's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold. "Unless you'd prefer I make this conversation more public?" Aria weighed her options and came up empty. Getting in the car was stupid and dangerous. Refusing might be worse, depending on what Dominic was willing to do in broad daylight on a Chicago street. She got in the car. Dominic gestured to the driver, and they pulled into traffic with the smooth efficiency of a well-rehearsed operation. He poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter, offered her one. "I don't drink. I'm pregnant." "Of course you are. How convenient." He sipped his own drink. "Let me be direct, Mrs. Moretti. You seem like an intelligent woman who's gotten herself into a complicated situation. I'm here to offer you a way out." "I don't need a way out." "Don't you? You're married to a dying man who's built his empire on violence and fear. In 4 years, maybe less, he'll be gone. And then what? You'll be left raising his child alone, surrounded by people who only care about you because of what you represent. That's not a future, Mrs. Moretti. That's a prison sentence." Aria kept her expression neutral, even as her heart hammered. "What exactly are you offering?" "Protection. A different alliance. My family has resources, connections. The ability to ensure you and your child want for nothing, without the baggage of Lucien's declining empire." Dominic leaned forward. "Here's what I know. You didn't choose this. You were coerced into it, probably to cover someone else's debt. That's not a marriage. It's indentured servitude. And I'm offering you freedom from it." "In exchange for what?" "Information. Access. Help us understand Lucien's operations, his weaknesses, his succession plans. And when the time comes, when he's gone, or too weak to fight back, you step aside and let us absorb what's worth saving. You get your freedom, your money, and the ability to raise your child away from all this ugliness. It was a good pitch, Aria had to admit. Smooth, logical, appealing to exactly the resentment she actually felt. In another universe, where she was a different person in a different situation, she might have even considered it. No, she said. Dominic's smile faltered. You might want to think about that. I have thought about it. The answer is no. Now let me out of the car, Mrs. Moretti. Let me out, or I start screaming, and we'll see how your family's reputation handles headlines about kidnapping a pregnant woman in broad daylight. Aria met his eyes steadily. Your choice. For a moment she thought he might call her bluff. Then he sighed, signaled the driver to pull over. You're making a mistake, Matt, he said as she reached for the door handle. Lucien can't protect you forever. When he falls, and he will fall, make sure you're not standing too close. Aria got out without responding, the door closing behind her with a soft click. She stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, watching the town car disappear into traffic. Then she pulled out her phone and called Lucien. He answered on the first ring. Aria, what's wrong? Dominic Caruso just tried to recruit me, offered protection and money in exchange for information about your operations. She kept walking, scanning the street for Carlos or threats or any sign that this wasn't over. I said no, but I thought you should know. Silence. Then, in a voice that could have frozen oceans, Where are you? 3 blocks from the gallery, heading back to where Carlos parked. I'm fine, Lucien. Shaken, but fine. Stay on the phone with me until Carlos gets to you. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't talk to anyone you don't know. Just... He took a breath, and she could hear him forcing control back into his voice. Just stay safe until I can get there. I'm okay. He didn't hurt me, just talked. He approached my pregnant wife and tried to turn her against me. That's an act of war, Aria. That's him saying he doesn't fear me anymore, doesn't respect the boundaries that have kept our families from open conflict for 20 years. Another breath. This changes everything. Carlos appeared then, running toward her with his weapon drawn, his face a mask of professional fury. Mrs. M, I'm so sorry. I was only gone for 2 minutes. It's fine. I'm fine. Lucien's on the phone. Carlos took the phone, had a rapid conversation in Italian that Aria only caught fragments of, then handed it back. He wants to talk to you, Carlos said, already scanning the street, his body positioned to shield her from any threat. Aria. Lucien's voice was calmer now, but she could hear the rage simmering beneath it. I need you to go home. Carlos will take you. I'm going to handle this, but I need to know you're safe first. What are you going to do? What I should have done weeks ago. I'm going to remind the Caruso family why attacking what's mine is a terminal mistake. The call ended, and Aria let Carlos guide her to the car, her mind racing. She'd just made a choice, chosen Lucien's side over the easy out, chosen loyalty to a man who'd coerced her into this situation over freedom from it. And the terrifying thing was, she wasn't even sure why. The next 48 hours passed in a tense blur. Lucien disappeared into meetings that lasted until 3 a.m, returning to the mansion exhausted and grimly satisfied. He didn't tell Aria what he'd done, and she didn't ask. But she saw the results. Dominic Caruso's face on the news, arrested on charges of tax fraud and money laundering. 2 of his top lieutenants found dead in what police were calling apparent suicides. A Caruso-owned property in Pilsen mysteriously catching fire, causing millions in damage. It was a systematic dismantling delivered with surgical precision. Is it over? Aria asked one night when Lucien finally came to bed at a reasonable hour. For now. Dominic's family will spend the next year fighting federal charges and trying to keep their remaining operations from collapsing. They won't have the resources to move against us, not while they're hemorrhaging money on legal fees and damage control. He settled beside her, his hand finding her stomach in a gesture that had become automatic. You did well, by the way. Not taking his offer. Did I have a choice? You always have a choice. You could have said yes, could have played both sides, could have taken the money and run, but you chose loyalty. I won't forget that. Aria covered his hand with hers, feeling the warmth of his palm against her still flat stomach. I didn't do it for you. I did it because I've already committed to this path, and switching sides in the middle would just complicate things further. I know, but I'm grateful anyway. He shifted closer, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. I know you didn't choose this, Aria. I know I forced you into an impossible situation, and you're making the best of it. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a transaction for me. You're not just the mother of my heir. Don't, she interrupted. Don't make this into something it's not. We're partners in a very strange situation, and we're learning to work together, but that's all this is. Don't complicate it with emotions neither of us can afford. Lucien was quiet for a long moment, then, what if I want it to be complicated? Then you're not thinking clearly. Stick to the plan, Lucien. Secure your legacy, protect your child, and let me walk away when the year is up. That's what we agreed to. And if I asked you to stay? After the year? After the contract is fulfilled? If I asked you to stay because I wanted you to, not because a piece of paper said you had to? Aria's breath caught. She turned to look at him in the darkness, searching his face for signs of manipulation or strategy. But all she saw was genuine question, genuine hope, and it terrified her more than any threat from the Caruso family ever could. Ask me then, she said finally. When the year is up, when I've fulfilled my obligations and you've kept your promises, ask me then, and maybe I'll have an answer. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. It's the best I can give you right now. Lucien nodded slowly, accepting the boundaries she was drawing. Then I'll take it, and I'll spend the next 9 months proving that staying might not be the worst decision you ever made. Despite everything, Aria smiled. The bar is extremely low, you realize. Good. I like achievable goals. They fell asleep like that, his hand on her stomach, her hand covering his, two people navigating an impossible situation and finding something almost like peace in the middle of it. 2 weeks later, Aria woke to blood. Not much, just spotting really, but enough to send ice through her veins. She stumbled to the bathroom, her hand shaking as she tried to assess the situation, tried to remember what Dr. Chen had said about normal versus emergency. Lucien! Her voice came out thin and scared, nothing like the controlled tone she'd been cultivating. Lucien, something's wrong. He was there in seconds, taking one look at her face and immediately shifting into command mode. What happened? Bleeding. Not a lot, but her voice broke. What if I'm losing it? What if... You're not losing anything. We're going to the hospital right now. He was already pulling on clothes, already calling someone. Dr. Chen, probably, or Carlos, or both. Can you walk? I think so. Then let's go. Careful. Slow steps. Carlos is bringing the car around. The drive to the hospital was a blur of panic and Lucien's steady voice telling her it was going to be fine, that early bleeding was common, that Dr. Chen was meeting them there. Aria wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't her body rejecting the one thing that gave this whole nightmare meaning. But all she could think about was the contract, and what it said about trying again if the pregnancy failed, and how she wasn't sure she could survive going through this twice. Dr. Chen was waiting when they arrived, professional and calm in a way that made Aria want to scream. They did tests, ultrasounds, blood work, all while Aria lay on the examination table, trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. Finally, Dr. Chen turned to them with a slight smile. The baby's fine. Heartbeat is strong. Development is right on track. What you experienced was likely implantation bleeding. It happens sometimes when the embryo settles into the uterine wall. Completely normal, nothing to worry about. The relief was so intense, Aria actually started crying, great heaving sobs that she couldn't control. Lucien's hand found hers, squeezing tight, and she heard his own breathing go shaky with released tension. Are you sure? He asked Dr. Chen. Positive, but I want to see Mrs. Moretti again in a week, just to confirm everything's progressing normally. And Aria? Dr. Chen's voice gentled. Stress isn't good for you or the baby. I know your situation is complicated, but try to find ways to relax, rest. Let people take care of you. Aria nodded, not trusting her voice. In the car on the way home, Lucien pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture of protection that she let herself lean into. I was terrified, he admitted quietly. In that moment, waiting to hear if we'd lost it, I was more terrified than I've been in 20 years. And I realized something. What? This stopped being about the contract a long time ago. This stopped being about legacy and strategy and all the rational reasons I gave you. Somewhere along the way, this became real. You became real. And the thought of losing either of you, he didn't finish, but he didn't have to. Aria closed her eyes, let herself be held, and wondered when exactly she'd stopped hating the man whose arms she was in. The pregnancy scare changed something fundamental between them, though neither acknowledged it directly for weeks afterward. Lucien became almost obsessively attentive, not in the suffocating way Aria had feared, but in small gestures that accumulated into something that felt dangerously close to care. He started working from home more often, claiming it was more efficient, but always positioning himself where he could see her. He replaced her coffee with expensive herbal teas that supposedly helped with prenatal health. He even canceled a trip to New York that had been planned for months, refusing to leave her alone for more than a few hours. "You're hovering," Aria said one afternoon, finding him in the hallway outside her study for the third time in 2 hours. "I'm being nearby. There's a difference." "Not really. What do you think is going to happen if you're not watching me every second?" "The baby's fine, Lucien. Dr. Chen said so." "I know what Dr. Chen said." He leaned against the doorframe, and she could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "But I also know that medical certainty and actual safety are two different things. And after everything we've been through, everything I've put you through, I'm not taking chances." Aria set down her sketch pencil, really looking at him. "When's the last time you slept through the night?" "I sleep?" "That's not what I asked." Lucien rubbed his face, a gesture of weariness he rarely allowed himself. "Since the bleeding scare?" "Not well. I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the threats I might not see coming. It's exhausting." "You can't protect us from everything. You're not invincible, no matter how hard you try to be." "I know, but I can try. It's all I know how to do. Try to control the uncontrollable, plan for every contingency, build walls high enough that nothing gets through." He paused. "It's kept me alive this long. It kept my organization intact when smarter men would have lost everything. But with you, with the baby, I'm starting to wonder if control is enough." Aria stood, crossed to where he leaned against the doorframe. Up close, she could see the silver at his temples, the fine lines that mapped years of stress and violence and impossible choices. He was 57, dying, and terrified in a way that probably didn't come naturally to a man who'd built an empire on fearlessness. "Come here," she said, taking his hand and leading him to the couch in her study. "Sit down before you fall down." "I don't need to rest." "Shut up and sit." To her surprise, he did. And when she settled beside him, he surprised her again by leaning into her, his head coming to rest on her shoulder in a gesture of vulnerability she'd never seen from him. They sat like that for a long time, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, the city distant and irrelevant beyond the glass. Aria's hand found its way to his hair, her fingers running through the silver strands in a soothing rhythm. She didn't quite remember deciding to start. "I'm scared," Lucien said quietly. "I've killed people. Destroyed lives, built an empire on other people's suffering, and I've never been scared. But this, you, the baby, the idea of leaving you both unprotected, it terrifies me." "Then let me help. Stop trying to do everything alone. You have people, Lucien. You have Carlos, Margaret, Elena. You have an entire organization built on loyalty and structure. Use them. And you, do I have you?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had been willing to voice until now. Aria thought about the past months, the contract that had started this, the coercion that had defined their beginning, and all the small moments since that had complicated the simple narrative of victim and monster. She thought about the way he'd held her hand during the ultrasound, the careful gentleness of his touch, the fact that he'd kept every promise he'd made even when breaking them would have been easier. "You have me," she said finally. "Not because of the contract, not because I have to be here, but because somewhere along the way, I chose this. I chose you, messy and complicated and impossible as that is." Lucien lifted his head to look at her, his expression raw. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." He kissed her then, soft and questioning, and Aria kissed him back. Not because she had to, not because of obligation or strategy, but because in that moment, with his guard completely down and his fear completely visible, she wanted to. When they pulled apart, Lucien's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I don't deserve you," he said. "Probably not. But we don't always get what we deserve. Sometimes we just get what we choose, and we make the best of it." "Then I choose this. I choose you, Aria. Every day for whatever time I have left, I choose you." It should have been romantic. In a movie, this would be the moment where violins swelled and the camera pulled back on a perfect embrace. But this was real life, messy and complicated, and Aria's response was pragmatic rather than poetic. "Prove it," she said. "Stop running yourself into the ground trying to control everything. Start trusting the people around you. And for the love of everything, get some actual sleep before you collapse." Lucien laughed. Genuine, surprised laughter that transformed his face into something younger. "You're very bossy for someone who's supposed to be the helpless captive bride." "I was never helpless. You just didn't realize it at first." "No, I didn't. My mistake." But he did start delegating more after that conversation, slowly letting Margaret and Vincent handle operations he would have micromanaged before. He still worked impossible hours, still carried the weight of the empire on his shoulders, but he let Aria in. Let her see the exhaustion and the fear and all the things he'd spent decades hiding. And Aria, for her part, stopped holding herself at arm's length, stopped pretending this was temporary, that she was just counting down days until freedom. She let herself plan for a future that included Lucien, at least for as long as his health allowed. The months passed with surprising speed. Aria's body changed, her stomach rounding in ways that made the pregnancy impossible to hide. Lucien attended every doctor's appointment, asked endless questions about nutrition and development, and started reading parenting books with the same intensity he applied to financial reports. "It says here we should start talking to the baby," he announced one evening, his hand splayed across her 6-month belly. "Apparently they can hear us, recognize voices. So talk." "What do I say?" "I don't know, Lucien. You're the one with the parenting book. Introduce yourself." He looked genuinely uncertain for a moment. This man who'd negotiated million-dollar deals and ordered executions without hesitation. Then he leaned close to her stomach and said, "Hello in there. I'm your father. I'm not very good at this, but I'm going to try. Your mother is significantly better at being a person than I am, so you should probably listen to her more than me. But I want you to know that you're already loved, already protected, and I will spend every day I have left making sure you have everything you need to be whoever you want to be." Aria felt tears prick her eyes. That was good. I have a very good teacher. They fell into new rhythms as winter settled over Chicago. Preparing the nursery, a project Lucien approached with military precision, researching cribs and changing tables like they were strategic acquisitions. Attending birthing classes that made them both deeply uncomfortable, but which Aria insisted were necessary. Even picking names, a process that took weeks of negotiation. "What about Isabella?" Lucien suggested one night. "After my first wife. If it's a girl." "No," Aria said gently. "That's too much weight to carry. Let this baby be their own person, not a memorial to someone who died." "Then you choose." They eventually settled on Sophia for a girl, Marco for a boy, a compromise that honored Lucien's past without being imprisoned by it. And when the ultrasound at 7 months revealed they were having a daughter, Aria watched Lucien's face crumple with an emotion she'd never seen him express before, pure, uncomplicated joy. "A girl," he whispered, staring at the screen like it held the secrets of the universe. "We're having a girl. You're not disappointed it's not a boy? No son to carry on the name?" "I have a daughter. I have you. I have more than I ever thought I'd get to have again." He turned to her, taking her face in his hands. "Thank you. For this, for everything, for choosing to stay, even when you didn't have to. I didn't really have a choice at first, remember? You have one now. Every day you have a choice, and every day you're still here." It was true. The contract's 1-year mark was approaching rapidly, and Aria had started receiving the paperwork for her settlement, $10 million, custody arrangements, the formal dissolution of their arrangement. She could sign it any time, could start planning her exit, could reclaim the independence she'd sacrificed. But every time she looked at the papers, she found reasons to delay. Just one more week, just until after the baby comes. Just until she was sure Lucien was stable enough to handle her leaving. The excuses were getting thinner, and they both knew it. December came with the kind of bitter cold that made Chicago feel hostile to human life. Aria was 8 months pregnant, moving slowly, perpetually uncomfortable in ways that made her snappish and irritable. Lucien handled it with surprising grace, absorbing her mood swings and physical complaints without complaint. My feet are swollen, I can't breathe properly, and I'm pretty sure this baby is using my bladder as a punching bag, Aria announced one morning, glaring at her reflection in the mirror. You're beautiful, Lucien said from the doorway. I'm a whale, an angry, uncomfortable whale who can't see her own feet. A beautiful whale carrying my daughter, the most beautiful whale in Chicago. He crossed to her, his hand settling on her shoulders. 2 more weeks, give or take. Then you get to meet her. 2 more weeks of this feels like an eternity. I know, but you're strong. You've survived everything else I've put you through. You can survive 2 more weeks of pregnancy. Aria leaned back against him, letting him support some of her weight. What happens after? After she's born, after the year is up? We've been avoiding that conversation. I know. So let's not avoid it anymore. What do you want, Lucien? Really want? Without the contract or the strategy or any of it? He was quiet for a long time, his hands moving in slow circles on her shoulders. I want you to stay. I want us to be a family, messy and unconventional and probably dysfunctional in ways that would horrify normal people, but a family. I want to watch Sophia grow up with her mother, want to teach her everything I know that's worth knowing, want to have whatever time I have left mean something beyond just building an empire. And me? What about what I want? What do you want? Aria turned in his arms, looking up at this man who'd bought her, coerced her, and somehow become someone she couldn't imagine leaving. I want to believe this is real, that we're not just 2 people making the best of a terrible situation. I want to know that if I stay, it's because you love me, actually love me, not because I'm convenient or useful or good for managing your legacy. I love you, Lucien said immediately. I fell in love with you somewhere between the contract and the coffee lessons and all the small moments in between. I love your strength, your refusal to be broken, the way you turned a nightmare into something bearable. I love that you challenge me, that you don't let me get away with being a monster, that you made me want to be better than I am. He took her face in his hands. I love you, Aria Moretti, and I'm asking, not demanding, not requiring, but asking, will you stay? Not for a year, but for however long we have? Aria felt tears streaming down her face, hormones and emotion and relief all tangled together. Yes, yes, you manipulative, impossible, frustrating man. I'll stay. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. And for the first time since she'd signed that contract, Aria felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 days before Christmas, Aria's water broke at 2 in the morning. She woke to wetness and the slow realization that this was actually happening, that the theoretical baby was about to become a very real baby, and that she was absolutely terrified. Lucien, she said, shaking him awake, it's time. He was on his feet instantly, all business and controlled panic. Are you sure? Is it... How far apart are the contractions? I don't know. It just started. But my water definitely broke, so yes, I'm sure. What followed was controlled chaos. Carlos summoned. Dr. Chen called. The hospital room that had been reserved for weeks suddenly becoming a destination instead of an abstraction. Aria labored through contractions while Lucien held her hand and looked more terrified than she'd ever seen him. You're doing great, he kept saying. You're so strong, you can do this. I changed my mind, Aria gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. I want this to stop. Make it stop. I can't, love. But I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. And he wasn't. Through 14 hours of labor, he never left her side. Held her hand until she crushed his fingers. Wiped her face with cool cloths. Murmured encouragement and endearments in Italian that she didn't understand but found soothing anyway. When Sophia finally arrived at 4:47 p.m. on December 22nd, screaming and red-faced and perfect, Aria watched Lucien cry for the second time since she'd known him. She's here, he whispered, staring at the tiny bundle the nurses placed in Aria's arms. She's actually here. Sophia Moretti weighed 7 pounds, 3 ounces, had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and immediately became the center of both their universes. That first night in the hospital, while Aria dozed and Sophia slept in her bassinet, Lucien sat in the chair beside the bed and made promises to his daughter in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. Promises about protection and love and making sure she never wanted for anything. Promises about being better than he'd been, living longer than the doctors predicted, fighting for every moment he could have with her. Aria pretended to sleep but listened to every word, her heart breaking and mending in equal measure. The weeks after bringing Sophia home were a blur of sleepless nights, endless diapers, and the steep learning curve of first-time parenthood. Lucien was surprisingly good at it, patient in ways Aria had never seen, willing to wake up for 2 a.m., feedings, completely unfazed by spit-up and crying. "You're a natural," Aria said one night, watching him rock Sophia back to sleep with practiced ease. "I had practice with my first daughter, even if it was only for 6 days. His voice was soft, sad. "I swore then that if I ever got another chance, I wouldn't waste a single moment. I meant it." "I know you did." They fell into routines again, this time built around Sophia's needs. Constance helped during the day, giving Aria time to shower and sleep and remember she was a person beyond just mother. Carlos installed security measures that would have seemed paranoid if they didn't live in Lucien's world. Margaret sent gifts, Elena sent legal advice about trust funds and succession planning, and somehow they built a family out of the most unlikely materials. The 1-year anniversary of their contract came and went without ceremony. The paperwork sat unsigned on Aria's desk, and neither of them mentioned it. They were too busy living, too consumed with feedings and milestones and the endless small crises of new parenthood to worry about deadlines that no longer felt relevant. It wasn't until Sophia was 3 months old, sleeping through the night in the nursery down the hall, that Aria finally brought it up. "We're past the contract's end date," she said one evening, curled up beside Lucien in the library. "I could leave now, take my settlement, take Sophia, start over. Is that what you want?" "No, but I want you to know that I'm staying by choice. Not obligation, not contract, just choice." Lucien pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her temple. "I never thought I'd get this. Never thought I'd have a family again, or love someone who actually loved me back, or have a daughter I'd get to watch grow up. You gave me all of that, Aria. You gave me a future when I thought I only had endings left. We gave each other a future. That's how this works." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling, the baby monitor on the table beside them transmitting Sophia's soft breathing. "I have to tell you something," Lucien said eventually. "I saw Dr. Martinez last week. Had my quarterly scans." Aria's stomach dropped. This was it, the moment where they'd find out the cancer was back, spreading, stealing whatever time they'd managed to build. "What did he say?" "The tumors are still in remission, have been for over a year now. He's cautiously optimistic that we might have beaten it, that I might have significantly more than 4 years." The relief was so intense, Aria actually started crying. "Are you serious? You're going to be okay?" "I'm going to keep fighting, keep getting checked, keep doing everything possible to be here for you and Sophia." He turned to face her fully. "I know I don't deserve this second chance. I know the things I've done should have killed me a dozen times over. But somehow I'm still here, and I'm going to make every day count." "You're not allowed to die," Aria said fiercely, grabbing his shirt. "You hear me? You promised me forever, and I'm holding you to it." "Forever is a long time, Mrs. Moretti." "Good. I like long-term commitments." Lucien laughed, pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promise and hope, and all the things they'd built from the wreckage of that first terrible night. Upstairs, Sophia stirred in her crib, making the small noises that meant she'd be awake soon and demanding attention. They both heard it through the monitor, smiled at each other, and stood to go to her together. Because that's what families did. They showed up, they adapted, they loved each other through the impossible moments and made the best of what they had. And what they had, against all odds, was enough. 5 years later, Aria stood in the garden of their Gold Coast mansion, watching Lucien chase their daughter through the flower beds while their son, 3-year-old Marco, toddled after them with the determined focus of someone who refused to be left behind. Sophia shrieked with laughter as her father caught her, swinging her up into his arms and spinning until they were both dizzy. At 62, Lucien was grayer, moved a little slower, but was still very much alive and defying every prediction his doctors had made. "Mama, watch," Sophia called. "Daddy's teaching me to be sneaky." "I see that. Please don't use those skills for anything I'll have to apologize for later." Lucien grinned at her over Sophia's head. "I make no promises about that. She's got your stubbornness and my strategic thinking. That's a dangerous combination. That's your genetic contribution. You deal with the consequences." Marco reached Aria and grabbed her leg, demanding to be picked up. She obliged, settling him on her hip, and watched her family play with a contentment she'd never imagined possible in those early days. The organization still existed, though Lucien had been slowly legitimizing operations, investing in legal ventures, cleaning up the worst excesses. He'd probably never be completely legitimate. There was too much history, too many bodies buried in the foundation of his empire. But he was trying. For his children, for his legacy, for the future he wanted to build. Aria had taken the consulting position with the Morgan Gallery years ago, working part-time on exhibitions that fulfilled her in ways the old job never had. She and Lucien had found a balance. Her career, his businesses, their children, the impossible family they'd built from a contract written in desperation. "What are you thinking about?" Lucien asked, appearing beside her with Sophia still in his arms. "How different this is from what I imagined that first night. How I thought I was signing away my life, and instead I found one worth living. Any regrets?" Aria looked at him, this man who'd coerced her, changed her, loved her through every impossibility, and smiled. "Only that I wasted so much time being angry instead of accepting what we could be. The anger was valid. I gave you every reason to hate me." "I know. And I did, for a while. But hate is exhausting, and love is surprisingly easy when you stop fighting it." Sophia wiggled to be put down, immediately running off to find whatever new mischief she could create. Marco squirmed in Aria's arms, wanting to follow his sister. They let both children go, watching them play with the careful attention of parents who knew how precious and fragile this all was. "I love you," Lucien said quietly, "in case I haven't mentioned it today. You mentioned it at breakfast during Sophia's morning tantrum and when I couldn't find my keys, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you, Aria Moretti, for choosing to stay when you didn't have to, for giving me a family I never thought I'd have, for seeing past the monster to whatever was underneath. The monster's still there sometimes. You're just better at managing him now, because you taught me how." They stood together in the garden, their children laughing in the background, the city sprawling beyond the garden walls, and Aria thought about choices, about the one she'd made in fear and desperation, signing a contract that had seemed like a death sentence, about all the small choices since to stay, to trust, to love, despite every reason not to. The contract was in a drawer somewhere, yellowed and forgotten, the terms fulfilled and exceeded years ago. They'd built something better than what that document had outlined, something real and messy and beautiful in its imperfection. "Race you to the fountain," Sophia yelled, already running. Marco toddled after her with Lucien in pursuit, his laughter carrying across the garden. Aria watched them go, her hand resting on her stomach where a third child, unexpected, unplanned, absolutely welcome, was just beginning to make their presence known. She'd tell Lucien tonight, after the children were asleep, watch his face light up with joy and terror in equal measure, listen to him make promises to this baby like he had to the others, fall asleep in his arms knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and small victories. The contract had promised her a year. She'd stayed for 5 and counting, not because she had to, but because somewhere between the coercion and the coffee lessons, between the fear and the family, she'd found something worth choosing every single day. Love wasn't what the contract had outlined, clinical, transactional, finite. Real love was complicated and messy, built on foundations that shouldn't have held but somehow did. It was choosing someone despite their flaws, seeing their darkness, and loving them anyway, building a future from the wreckage of impossible beginnings. "Mama," Sophia called, "come play with us." Aria walked toward her family, her husband who'd bought her and then loved her, her children who existed because of a contract and thrived because of choice. and felt something she'd been missing since that first terrible night. Peace. Not the absence of conflict or challenge, but the deep knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with people who would fight for her as fiercely as she'd fight for them. The deal that shouldn't have existed had given her everything that mattered. And as Lucien caught her hand, pulling her into the game with Sophia and Marco, Aria Bennett Moretti smiled and chose, for the 1000th time and not the last, to stay. Because some contracts, it turned out, were made to be exceeded, and some endings were really just beginnings in disguise.